Good evening, everyone. It's 7 o'clock, and I'd like to call the meeting of the Village of Friendship Heights Council to order. Thank you for attending, both live or streaming, and go blue. Copies of tonight's agenda, the sign-up sheet for the public comment period later on the agenda, and the rules governing the public comment period are in the front of the room to your left. If you wish to speak for 3 minutes during the public comment period, please be certain to have signed up and read the rules. One item will be added to tonight's agenda under new business. It's a data use agreement with a faculty member and student at the George Washington University Trachtenberg School of Public Policy and Public Administration. These researchers work to prepare the quality of life survey and will help with its analysis and report generation. The first item on Council's agenda tonight is a presentation by Atara Margulies about the results from the County Planning Department's urban design study. You'll recall that Ms. Margulies has spoken with us before as the study was being planned and to provide an update on the study's progress. Hopefully, many of you participated in the study. There were opportunities here at the Village Center and also at the County Recreation Facility just above Whole Foods Market and a little bit down the plaza. The study's goal, you'll recall, was to determine how people experience the open space, pedestrian and transit networks, activity centers, and public life today. This may be a preliminary foray into county planning's vision for Friendship Heights and its surrounding neighborhoods, but that remains to be seen. After Ms. Margulies' presentation, I'll turn first to other members of the council for questions and then provide a few minutes for questions for those who attending who have them. So Ms. Margulies, all yours.
It's nice to be back here, everyone. Just adjust the microphone for short me. Okay. So as I think many of you know, my name is Atara Margulies. As the chair said, I've been here before. I'm a master planner at Montgomery Planning. Here to share a summary of our preliminary findings for the Friendship Heights Urban Design Study. We're actually sharing this presentation with numerous community groups in and around Friendship Heights over the next few weeks, and then we plan to go to the planning board with a more finalized version of this presentation in mid-February. I'll say this again at the end, but I'll say it now before you've all listened to me talk for 25 minutes or so. If anyone here is not on our e-letter and you would like to be, there will be an email and a website at the very end of this, or certainly Julian has my information. So if you get on that, then there will be an e-letter that goes out to everyone in advance of our planning board presentation. And at that point, the draft report will be posted online. So that's an important thing to know about. So if you're not already, if you didn't already sign up or you're not sure, you can contact me, go to the website, ask for my contact info, and we can make sure you're on. So that's the one thing I want everyone to definitely remember, so you don't miss the final presentation. Next slide. So tonight's agenda is to review the goals of the study and the limits of the study area, go through an overview of the engagement process, and then dive into the analysis and the engagement we did around the 4 urban design frameworks that were studied. And then we'll conclude with some lessons learned. Next. So we're calling this an urban design study, but what is urban design? Urban design is the shaping of the physical form of a place such that the buildings, streets, parks, and public spaces work in harmony together to create a dynamic, welcoming place that supports a thriving public life. Good urban design creates a strong public realm. The public realm is any space or built environment that is open and accessible for public use, regardless of ownership. So that includes streets and sidewalks, but also plazas and parks and open spaces, and even in some communities, sort of indoor, outdoor spaces that are open to the public. All of that is public realm. From Montgomery Planning's first planning exercise in Friendship Heights in 25 years, we determined that studying the public realm would help us understand the structure of Friendship Heights and what it's like to experience the urban area today. So now we're going to look at the goals that we identified in the scope of work and that we've presented here before. The goal of the study is to analyze how people experience the existing open spaces, pedestrian and transit networks, activity centers, and public life in Friendship Heights today. Next. Community engagement, which many of you participated in, thank you, in the fall included regular coordination with municipalities, but also with the residents and lots of other stakeholders. This study highlights the urban design strengths and needs of this unique cross-jurisdictional transit-oriented community. It is important to note that as a study, this effort analyzes and identifies the strengths and challenges I just talked about, but it is not going to recommend changes for the future. Next. So here's the study area. We've all looked at this here before. The dashed dot line going around Friendship Heights is the same one as the 1998 sector plan boundary. This study focuses on that area, obviously the downtown as we call it, but also looks, because it's a study, we looked at their surrounding neighborhoods, we went into DC to understand the DC context, and so this whole, what's on this map sort of correlates to us as sort of the study area. Just to recap the project schedule on the next slide, we took the scope to the board originally in July of 2023. We worked on the urban design analysis in the summer all the way through into the fall. We did engagement in the fall. I know a lot of people here were involved in that. And now we're working on the summary report. The final piece of this will be a report that will be online. It'll be able to be downloaded. You'll be able to get a hard copy from our department, like with everything we do. So it'll be, that's the sort of final deliverable, if you will. As I said earlier, we're going to go to the planning board sometime in February, date still being worked out, and then hopefully we'll have that final report online in March. And as is customary with all studies, and I'll say this again at the end, whenever we do a study at the planning department, we sort of send it to the council. Sometimes they ask for a briefing, sometimes they don't. We'll find out. We don't know in advance. So let's talk about engagement. So in this section, I'm going to talk about the engagement process for the study and also look at some key takeaways. So hearing from stakeholders was a major part of this study. We strove to understand how people feel about Friendship Heights and how it is to experience being in and about Friendship Heights today. We worked with an engagement consultant, Brick and Story. Many of you met members of that team at our events. They were actually already familiar with Friendship Heights because they worked with the DC Office of Planning on that office's Wisconsin Avenue Development Framework Plan. So they brought sort of a knowledge of the area already, but they enjoyed getting to learn more about the Maryland side of Friendship Heights in this project. Our largest engagement events in person were the 2 open house events that we ran at the end of October. Thank you very much to any of those who attended. And at these events, for those who weren't there, we had boards set up around the room with stickers and post-it note comments, and we had about 75 people come to those. And then we also had an online questionnaire that many of you also answered that had basically the same material. We had about 140 responses to that questionnaire over the 6 weeks it was up. We also had pop-ups at various locations. We were out and about, sitting in front of Whole Foods, sitting at different corners in Friendship Heights. We took tables at community events like the business fair that was here. We walked around handing out flyers. We went into all the businesses and talked to them about the study. And of course, we went to a lot of regular community meetings, not just at the village, but also in some of the neighboring special taxing districts and municipalities, and also other neighborhoods and other community organizations. Next. So I'm going to talk about some of the takeaways. So some of the takeaways focus on people's experience of those networks that we looked at, and that's going to be talked about in the next section. But some of the initial engagement questions were about stakeholders' relationships to Friendship Heights and how they identify with the downtown. We asked what people like about Friendship Heights, and the top responses, I think unsurprisingly, focused on some of the great things about Friendship Heights. Its immense walkability, the many green spaces in the neighborhood, the access to Metro Rail, and Friendship Heights as generally a welcoming and safe community. This question was multiple choice, and while there was room in the questionnaire in lots of places to write in people's own thoughts, we gave a lot more room for individuality with the next question. Next. So the next question was, describe Friendship Heights in 3 words. And we sort of asked these kind of questions so it's less leading, right? We're asking you to fill in a blank. So we can really get people's essential reactions to what do they think is the essence of Friendship Heights to them. And the responses were really varied, and I think we learned a lot from this question, and I want to share it with all of you. So we had answers that were totally positive, answers that were totally negative, and everything in between. 40% of the respondents in their 3 words used both positive and negative words in the same answer, which I thought was really fascinating and probably points to a dichotomy that we have to look into in the future or something, because it was this, we didn't get into that so much in this study, because again, we were really focused on public realm. You always want to understand where people are coming from, right? The context, and sort of get a little bit of the temperature of the community today. And this question kind of, I think, got at that for us, and you know, we want to share it back with everyone. And of course, just as an aside, with all these engagement takeaways, the report is going to have even more in-depth charts and looking at metrics, and then we have an engagement appendix eventually that will be attached to the report when it's final, and that has sort of even more depth, like all the metrics and all the answers to the questions and things like that. But for this summary, so we're not here for an hour and a half, giving you the highlights. So this Venn diagram of sorts captures some of the words used to describe Friendship Heights in the responses. In the green area on the left, if you can see from where you're sitting, are the positive descriptors, and we just picked out the sort of the most common ones. And the negative words are sort of all the way on the right, which is actually somewhat orange, although it doesn't look orange today. And in the middle are sort of the responses that describe a bit of both. Words that describe, some convey some potential hope. They're not really fully negative. They're sort of a comment on some other aspect of Friendship Heights, and they sort of are very kind of hopeful. And I thought those was a great way to categorize the different things. And like I said, some answers said one from the left and one from the right in the same answer. And I also want to add, and this is not in this summary because again, it's just too much information to give over in one presentation. We collected demographic information from all of the questionnaire respondents and from many of the open house participants via an exit survey, whoever wanted to fill one out. The final report of this study is going to include a comparison of the demographics of the engagement participants to the demographics of Friendship Heights. We've started that analysis, and I can say that the main takeaway is that given the small sample size, about the 200 or so people that we spoke to between all those things who answered the demographic. Obviously, we did speak to more people, but from the data we have, given that small sample size, it's pretty representative of the population. There are a handful of disparities that the report's going to get into, but just to give everybody that sort of basic idea, I think from a age and racial identity perspective, we got pretty close to sort of the breakdown in Friendship Heights. So I would say we felt pretty good about that, even though it was a pretty small sample size. And of course, there's many people we did not talk to. And the report will get into all of that. And I'm sure when we're at the planning board that we're going to have to go through all of that as well. Okay, let's get into the urban design analysis. Next. So the first step we took was to take a high-level look at Friendship Heights as compared to the other downtowns of Montgomery County, and I'll explain what we're looking at. So these kinds of diagrams that are black and white, for those who are not familiar, are called figure ground diagrams, and they're sort of a standard urban design tool people have been using for a long time. It's a two-dimensional map of an urban space that shows the relationship between built and unbuilt. The black figures are all the buildings, the footprints of the buildings, and the white is sort of everything else. It's roads, it's parks, it's parking lots, it's whatever other kinds of features that are not buildings. So you can see on the left is Friendship Heights. If you can't see that, it's the one that's outlined in red. So in case you can't read it, that's the one outlined in red. Next, the one that's oriented up and down like this is Silver Spring, which kind of looks like a teardrop. On the top right is Bethesda, and you can see that Wisconsin Avenue white line going down the right. And then underneath Bethesda is Wheaton, so on the bottom right. So these are the four downtowns in Montgomery County. In the olden days, in the old zoning code, we used to call them the four central business districts, and they had special zoning, which no longer applies, but it still allows us to look at them because urbanistically, these are different places than everywhere else in the county. So if we look at Friendship Heights first, we can see in the one with the red box around it that you've got this downtown. You can see those large buildings and the sort of larger blocks, and there's almost a white buffer of sorts that surrounds it on the Maryland side. And you can see where Western comes as a diagonal and breaking it with DC. DC has a very regular block pattern, except for Wisconsin on the diagonal, so that's really clear. And then if you look on the Maryland side, in our study area, there's a nice white buffer going around, and that represents all of the parking lots and Somerset Park in the green, and then the parking lots of the collection and the buffer park on the right. So Friendship Heights, the downtown, is really, it is from a block and street pattern rather disconnected from the downtown, and you can see that here really clearly. All those neighborhood streets come in and they just sort of stop. That's different from an urban design sort of 10,000 foot level from the other downtowns. They all have aspects of that here and there, but it's not as continuous at all. If you look at Silver Spring or Bethesda, on the Maryland side of Silver Spring, which is not the bottom left, but everything else, you can see the Metro Rail kind of cut through the middle if you know what you're looking at. But even so, on the right side, you see a lot of streets that start in the downtown and like spokes, they just reach out to the neighborhoods. The building scale changes, but it's not quite the same relationship. Same thing you see in Bethesda, very similar to that. Wheaton is kind of a cross between the Friendship Heights condition and the other conditions. You've got more of an integrated transition in terms of street connectivity on the east side, but on the west side you have Westfield Mall, which, similar to sort of the Geico site on the Friendship Heights side, it's just a really big site, and from an urban design perspective is just like sort of a hard stop before you get to Kensington. So this is just a way to sort of understand how does Friendship Heights function as a downtown versus the way the other downtowns function. So that's sort of one kind of higher level look. In the report, we'll get into a few other high level looks, but I think this is sort of one of the more interesting ones. Now let's then get into each of the networks that we looked at within Friendship Heights. Pedestrian network, the transportation network, the open space network, and the network of what we call community amenities, which I'll describe what that is. So we made 6 site visits dedicated to urban design analysis. We made many other site visits for other engagement purposes and other things. And we noticed things in every single time, but we made sort of 6 visits from the summer to the fall where we walked around systematically looking with our urban design glasses on at everything in Friendship Heights and also walking around all the surrounding neighborhoods and DC, et cetera. And for each network, we're going to talk first about our observation and analysis as urban designers, and we're going to call that what we saw. And then we're going to follow that with what we learned during engagement about each of these networks, and we're going to call that what we heard so that we can follow through. Next. So we're going to start with pedestrian network. So overall, Friendship Heights has a strong and continuous pedestrian network. Sidewalks are everywhere. You can walk on every street. There's a mature tree canopy that exists in many places, and even those that aren't quite mature yet, they've got trees planted in most places, so one day they will be there. On the county and state-owned streets, there are high visibility crosswalks everywhere. There are signalized mid-block crossings and what we felt were logical places. We saw people using them. The village, as you guys probably know, has brick paver crosswalks. It's very consistent in the village. It looks great. I think sometimes there are visibility issues maybe with dark sidewalk, with dark crosswalks like that, what we've learned from our work elsewhere, but it is consistent from an aesthetic perspective, certainly. And then next. So the pedestrian network is great inside Friendship Heights, as we said, and we really, it's a nice place to walk, as many of you have told us in the engagement, and we agree. However, when you try to walk from Friendship Heights to one of the surrounding neighborhoods or vice versa, it's a little bit more challenging. Because of those buffers that exist around Friendship Heights, there are a few connections between the downtown and the neighborhoods around it. There are connections, but you have to really know where to find them. If you were a visitor to Friendship Heights, you'd have a hard time figuring out how to walk to, Chevy Chase or Somerset or even Brookdale. And so these are some of the examples. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with them. On the right is that gate in the middle, that's right in the middle of the wall that basically runs from the Saks parking lot all the way down to the end of the collection parking lot. And you have to sort of find that middle point where there's an opening. And on the total other side of Friendship Heights, Brookdale Neighborhood Park connects to Geico at the back side. Otherwise, there's a separation between Brookdale and the entire length of the Geico property. And if you want to figure out that connection, I think you'd have to know where you were going. You'd have to know to walk around Geico through the parking lot, essentially, because there's no path, find that park, and connect through it. And so for the people who know, I think those are connections that work well, but I think it's probably a challenge for people who don't know. The Somerset one is equally challenging. It's even more hidden, and it also has sort of like mobility, accessibility issues. So it works well for some people, but probably not for a lot. Now we're going to talk about street activation. So street activation, and I'll define what that is a key contributor to a successful urban pedestrian network. This is sort of an urban design concept that is well known and sort of well employed everywhere in lots of downtowns and cities and urban areas everywhere. An active street is one where there's like an interplay between the public realm and the ground floor zones of the building on the street. It is something that you may not realize or think about until you sort of talk about it kind of academically. But then when you think about the streets that you like to walk on, you will realize, maybe you already realize this, but maybe after this conversation you will think about it, that those streets typically have a level of activation. And so I'll talk about what does that mean. That level of activation can contribute to the experience in a significant way. So the streets in Friendship Heights vary widely with regard to this. Wisconsin Avenue is shown on the first 2 photos on the left. So Wisconsin is quite active. That's probably our highest and most active street. And of course, it's got ground floor retail up and down the street from, pretty much from Western, but certainly from Willard all the way up to South Park. And it's filled with a lot of storefronts have engaging and colorful displays and signage and sidewalk boards, and even the seating that's outside, even where there's a plaza, like the plaza with the Starbucks as on the left. It's a plaza and the building is set back, but it's an active plaza and it's filled with seating, and the Starbucks kind of keeps it interesting. And even though there are some vacant storefronts along Wisconsin, the dominant experience for those few blocks is really an active one. But ground floor retail is definitely not the only way to activate a street. So on the right, you have 2 pictures of North Park Avenue, which I think we felt it sort of serves it like as the main residential spine of the village in a lot of ways. And it has buildings with entrances and canopies that reach the street, particularly the building that's the third or the second from the right, that doesn't actually have a vehicle driveway, so its entrance is right there and the canopy is right there. It's got these nice terraced landscape planted beds in the spring and summer. It's really welcoming. And you've got a lot of buildings with balconies that face the street and windows that face the street. And when you're walking on that street, even if there's no one on a balcony, you have the sense that you know a little bit about what the building is doing. You know how the building is facing the street. You understand it's the front. You know this is where the activity is. You have a sense that whether you do encounter someone coming in and out of an entrance or not, if you were looking to visit someone, you know where the entrance is. So it's a pretty, I would say, relatively active street for a street that has pretty much solely residential frontage, and that's another way to keep things active. Next slide. So on the opposite end of the scale, there are a bunch of streets that, sort of are the opposite end of the activation scale, if you will. So on the Hills Plaza and Willard, and these are a mix of those 2 here, and you might recognize some of them, even though, and exactly, Willard's on the left, you've got a pretty decent sidewalk, you've got beautiful trees giving you shade, lending their greenery to your walk. However, you are walking next to long stretches of blank building walls, some of them from the above-ground parking podiums, and it can be very isolating to just continuously walk along a blank wall, particularly with, I think, some of the parking podiums, which is popular here to have that above-ground parking podium. You have no sense of what's going on above you. Like, you're walking next to something, it's not the building, you're not really sure what it is, and then sometimes you have not just a blank wall, but even like big vents from the parking right next to you. So that is sort of the opposite, and we do have some of that here. And, we just sort of want to, we asked people sort of what streets are pleasant and not pleasant to walk on. People gave us all kinds of answers, but we wanted to reflect on sort of the urban design aspects of those streets. And I don't know if those things, some of them match up sometimes, but we want to identify this as another condition that we observed. And the last thing I want to talk about with our observations for pedestrian network is, even though Friendship Heights has been a downtown for a while, and it's very walkable, as we said, particularly when you get to a residential building, even though it's a pedestrian-oriented neighborhood in a lot of ways, a lot of the entrances to the residential buildings are really designed with cars in mind. There are really big circular driveways, wide, accommodating more than one vehicle at a time, that, especially you look at the Carlton on the right, you're walking and then your sidewalk stops and now you're crossing a really large curb cut. Sometimes as a pedestrian, particularly I think at the Elizabeth for us, it was as a pedestrian who was unfamiliar the first time we came, we weren't sure where that front entrance was. There was a lot of vehicle activity in front of the building. So there's a lot of that here too, and it's just something to call out because it's kind of maybe a bit of a contradiction in times if you're a pedestrian and you're encountering this over and over again. Next. So now I'll move to what we heard. So for the engagement centered around the pedestrian network, we asked people where do they like to walk and if they feel safe and comfortable in Friendship Heights, and if not, to provide some detail. And people were able to write in and also answer multiple choice questions about these questions. So the vast majority of people said Friendship Heights was a great place to walk. And that was their number one thing. And they love to walk everywhere, and they were so, effusive about it. They didn't even get specific. They just said, everything's great. We love walking here. 20% of people said they felt comfortable everywhere. They've never felt unsafe or uncomfortable. Some people opt not to answer the question about they say most places they feel safe without giving details. Some people express some safety concerns about walking around after dark. I mean, that was sort of, if there was a safety concern that was the most common, either because there's inadequate lighting on some blocks, and sometimes maybe it's some street crossings. People also mentioned on the higher traffic streets like Wisconsin and Willard, just the vehicle speeding, particularly after hours where there's less traffic. Those are sort of things that were mentioned in our question about, is there anywhere you feel unsafe or that there are safety issues? So I wanted to highlight that. Move to the next network. So transportation network. Friendship Heights Transportation Network is great. It's got great access to Metro, obviously, one of the big assets of this neighborhood, and also to both DC and Montgomery County bus lines. And of course, it's located on a major north-south corridor, so it's very easy to go north or south from Friendship Heights, and even in other directions, but certainly up and down sort of the Wisconsin 355 corridor. The Village, as you all know very well, operates the free shuttle, which is a great asset as well. We show all the, you don't have to, these are all the existing traffic routes. In the report, you can see them, but there's nothing super interesting about the map. It, makes the stops through the Village. It goes down to the commercial area. It runs to the Giant and Westbard. All that is really fantastic. The one thing we are going to note is that in the 2018 countywide bicycle master plan, there were some bike facilities proposed for Friendship Heights. They haven't come to fruition yet. The report's going to indicate that and just show the bike master plan map so we can identify that is something that is like currently planned, that predates any of our work, and that applies to this area. Next. So in terms of transportation network, we asked stakeholders how do they get around Friendship Heights and how do they get to and from Friendship Heights. And we don't have the results separated based on people who live here or don't live here. For this study, we sort of asked those same questions to everyone. Everybody walks. I know you can't see the numbers, but the most left-hand column for both of these, and the one on the left is how do people get around in Friendship Heights. The one on the right is how do people get to and from Friendship Heights. So if they're coming here or they live here and they're leaving or coming back. The column on the left is walking. So it's 86% in how people get around, 68%, which means people are walking out of Friendship Heights. They're walking into DC, they're walking into Friendship Heights from DC. There is a lot of walking going on between Friendship Heights and other places. Less than half of the respondents said they used their personal car within Friendship Heights. I thought that was pretty good. Outside, coming and going from Friendship Heights, high use of Metro Rail and a high use of personal car. None of those were surprising, but they were good to see. Very few people reporting using rideshare at all. We actually didn't have a lot of people report that they use the shuttle either. I know that now the Village is starting to track shuttle usership, so but I know hasn't been tracked historically, so we don't have that data. But at least in this very unofficial kind of questionnaire exercise, we did not get a lot of answers about people using the shuttle. And we didn't get a lot of people answer that they bike. What we did get is, we did observe people biking here. We got some respondents saying they like to bike, and then some people saying they would like to bike more if they felt safer doing so, particularly on the streets that take you out of Friendship Heights. And those are the busy streets, and they don't have bike facilities. And we had a few comments people wrote in on that sort of thing, so just sharing that as well. We are going to move to the open space network. So there's lots of parks and green spaces, as everyone here knows, in Friendship Heights. And in our study, we included all the ones on the periphery as well, because we were really interested to know, do those serve Friendship Heights, or are they mainly serving their own neighborhoods? So I know it's hard to see on this map, but in the report, there'll be two maps, one showing ownership. And basically, you have the public parks, the MNC PPC Park and Planning owned parks on the periphery. So you've got Western Grove on Western, Brookdale at that intersection between Brookdale and the Geico property, and Willard Avenue going around on that corner at Willard and River and connecting to Somerset Park. And then inside Friendship Heights, as you guys know, you have parks owned by the Village, like the ones, this one, and also Page Park. And then you've got some what we call privately owned public spaces that are like the developer owned or property owner owned, green spaces like Willoughby, like the green space catty corner from Willoughby in front of Wisconsin Place Apartments. We've also got the privately owned plazas. And then there are, if you go to the next slide, thank you. There is also, this is looking at those different parks by experience. There are sort of they're not, I wouldn't quite call them privately owned public spaces, because we usually preserve that category for when you have a development project and they're required to provide open space. And then they do, similar to like Willoughby Park. But then you've got things like the Geico lawn and the lawn at Somerset House, which people who live there certainly avail themselves of, and other sort of green spaces in Friendship Heights that are in like an in-between category. And so we saw people using some of those, but I think the engagement is really interesting, and we'll get to that just in a second. Not quite. And our other observations were that this park is really well used, and it's really designed well for social interaction and, of course, in interplay. It's activated in a lot of ways by the community center and vice versa. It's a really great setup. It seems to be working well. We also saw when we were in Willard Avenue, a lot of people using those active recreation opportunities there. which was sort of great to see that. We saw people sort of using a lot of the different green spaces in different ways. I will say we didn't really see, I went to Willoughby like 3 times to see if I'll ever see anybody using it. I think I maybe saw one person all the times we were there. So that seemed to be less popular in terms of our observations. I want to also talk about the plazas. Next slide. So everybody here is familiar with these. You have a very large plaza at Bloomingdale's. It is filled now with a lot of plantings and furniture and shade structures. Every time we were here, there was either a handful to no one in the plaza. On the Collections Plaza, because it's situated as sort of a pedestrian connection between the parking and Wisconsin, I think it gets a lot more people walking through it, certainly. It doesn't really help that one side of the plaza is empty retail. I think if it was occupied, and hopefully when that becomes occupied, that will give the plaza a little more opportunity for activation. We did see a handful of people sometimes sitting there. Next. So Open Space Network, what we heard. We asked stakeholders to tell us which parks they visit. We asked, regardless of ownership, how often they visit. So I think we asked, which one do you visit most regularly? Which one do you visit sometimes? Which one do you visit never at all? And so this is sort of a kind of a summary of where people visit regularly. I know it's very hard to read on the slide. It's hard to read at this point, but I'll walk you through it. The very top most popular park is Hubert Humphrey. The next most popular is Willard Avenue. Somerset Park, the green buffered area where you could sort of walk on the trail in between this neighborhood and Somerset. And the biggest shock for us was that the Geico lawn was the 4th most popular open space in Friendship Heights. On the weekends, as I guess you guys are familiar, and we learned over the course of this study and through our observations, people really use that lawn during the weekends. Kids, dogs, or just walking, or just using it for, relaxation. So obviously that lawn is providing something for the community that they don't have in any of the more sort of traditional parks and public spaces in the community. A lot of people said, actually, when we asked sort of, if you haven't visited as a park, why haven't you? Like, we had people check off, and you could say, like, I never visited these parks, and then check from our list of, top 10, and then you could fill in other. And the most common, I think there were 2 most common responses to that question. If you didn't, some people visited all, which I was not surprised at. If you said no to a bunch, the answer was either it's not close enough to me, so I don't usually go there, or I didn't know it existed. And I find that, and we had that answer way more than once, and in the summary we'll capture that. I found that surprising because they're pretty much it's a very compact area, but I think some of that may point to sort of, a lot of people didn't know where Western Grove Urban Park is. I think because of its the difficulty to get there from Friendship Heights, even though it's physically so close, maybe explain some of that. I have to look into it a little bit more so we can figure out, what to write about that intelligently. But that stuck out to me as something that I thought was a little surprising. So this is just a sort of a snapshot. One of the other things we did is we allowed people to give us a lot of comments about the open spaces. So in the report, we're going to sort of summarize what are the different sorts of comments we got about the different open spaces. Mostly that about sort of the more official parks, people had a lot of things to say about. Hubert Humphrey, lots of positive things to say. For example, Willoughby, other than sort of dog friendly, we had a lot of kind of negative or neutral comments about that. A lot of positive about Brookdale. So this is just a snapshot. We heard about all of the top sort of 6 or 7 spaces, some positive, some negative, and we're going to summarize that in a nice graphic summary for everyone in the report. So the last thing, last network to talk about is community amenities. So what is community amenities? So those are neighborhood services and features that enhance the quality of life in an area. And that may include a long laundry list of things. It could be grocery stores and restaurants and retail. It could be neighborhood-facing services like dry cleaners and hair salons. Could be civic resources like rec centers, libraries. Could be, sort of emergency medical services like urgent care, pharmacies. Could be arts and entertainment venues, theaters and museums, even public art. These are things that sort of allow you to kind of live your whole life and all the things you need on a day-to-day basis and all the things you want to do, sort of a reasonable number of things for, some recreation, sort of filling up all those buckets. Not every community has all of those, but, sort of figuring out what does Friendship Heights have, what does it not have, and then in the engagement, you'll see we ask people, what do they like about what's here, what do they go, elsewhere for. So, in our observations, some of the major draws in Friendship Heights are actually the Whole Foods, probably one of the biggest destinations, at least that we observed in Friendship Heights. It draws people, not just brings people from in Friendship Heights out to that particular retail destination, but brings people from even the surrounding neighborhoods there. Also, the lot of medical offices here. People really come to Friendship Heights from neighboring communities and also around the county because there are doctors here. We saw there are a lot of independent pharmacies here, probably supported somewhat by those doctors' offices, but we also noted that there's no large chain pharmacy that would be open extended hours or on the weekends. That's something that we just noticed for an area with a lot of medical offices. There's obviously this community center and the Wisconsin Place Rec Center. We saw both of those being used at different times. This is a very busy place. We saw people using the rec center as well. It has a very wide variety of programming. It is probably not the easiest to find if you don't know it's there, but it seemed from our engagement that a lot of people do know it's there and regularly avail themselves of what they have to offer. We also noted, and in the report, we'll get more into this, the many examples of public art in Friendship Heights. There are some very unique things here, as you guys all know. I'm particularly fascinated by the three-piece time sculpture. That is like a three-piece thing, if everybody is not familiar, part of Willoughby. There's quotations in an arc on the sidewalks, and then there's the fountain at Leah's. Those actually are part of one, conceived as part of sort of one art installation. I did a whole deep dive on that. I'd be happy to talk about it with anybody afterwards. But we are going to summarize what we've seen in terms of public art, because I think it is a community amenity, right? It really adds something. It adds something to the public spaces. This sculpture is very well known, the policeman standing out there. It's certainly unique, even in the county, for the way it engages with the public realm. So we felt that was definitely worth sort of noting, something that we saw. So in terms of what we heard, we asked stakeholders to indicate, and the answer to this chart I'll talk to in a second. It doesn't matter that we can't read it because it's just a takeaway that I'll talk about in a minute. So we asked stakeholders to indicate which amenities they used in Friendship Heights most and which they left the area to access. And we had a multiple choice list of all the categories. So unsurprisingly, people use everything they have here, and they like the restaurants. That's one of the top things they reported they love. But it lacks many of those other categories. And people actually, one of the things said, people said that while it might not be in Friendship Heights, because we're on a great north-south corridor, they can get to DC easily, or to Bethesda or Rockville, and between that, north-south traveling, they can get everything they need. So even if Friendship Heights is missing some things, it seems like there's relatively easy access to many of those things. However, some people did note. What did people note mostly that they missed here? So people noted that they would love some kind of art and culture amenity here, or even a place to catch a movie. That was a popular response. Some people said that they actually noted what we noticed, which was the lack of like a pharmacy with more hours. Some people noted that they felt the retail here is particularly expensive and they wish there was more affordable retail. Those were sort of, we got a lot of comments. Again, the report will get into more of those, but those were probably the 3 or 4 most popular that we saw most often. So we're highlighting them here. Next. So, in closing, I'm going to summarize some of the lessons learned as well as some of the opportunities for future study that we identified. Remember, this is a study, so we're not making any recommendations, but we hope that this discussion has highlighted some of the strengths and challenges of the public realm in Friendship Heights. So, the assets of Friendship Heights. Easy access to multiple modes of transit, including the Metro Rail. That is definitely one of the top assets, as everybody here is aware. The strong and pretty safe pedestrian network with the tree canopy that shades a lot of streets. It's a great place to walk. People love walking here. There's a variety of green spaces throughout the downtown. You're never more than a block or two from a green space, a shaded area to sit down and rest. I think that's very important in an area that people walk a lot in. And that's actually unique compared to some of the other downtowns. In Friendship Heights, you've got green spaces where you can find a place to sit down and rest in a park in the middle. Some of the other downtowns struggle with finding those spaces in the center of the downtown. And there's a really strong and relatively successful active retail corridor on Wisconsin. Next. So here are sort of the things we would say that these are what we call areas for further study. The connection between the downtown and the surrounding neighborhoods is challenging and hard to find and sort of hard to make that connection at a pedestrian level. There's limited opportunities for active recreation in the downtown, and people did talk, I didn't talk about that, but that was something we heard a lot during the open space network engagement. And there are public parks at the periphery with those opportunities, but perhaps, again, linked to the first bullet point, some of those are a little bit hard to access, and so that may contribute to people feeling that they don't have enough access to active recreation. And there are lots of sizable public spaces here, like the plazas, but those are probably unactivated more often than they are activated. There are some stakeholders, as I noted, that feel that there are safety issues in terms of, street lighting and visibility and also vehicular speeds. And the pedestrian network is great, but you're interrupted often by the building entrances and sort of the many curb cuts for some of the surface parking lots, and that kind of breaks up and impacts your your experience of walking in Friendship Heights. So that's our lessons learned in this preliminary findings presentation. We're going to present the same presentation about 5 or 6 more times in the next few weeks. Then, like I said, we're going to the planning board in mid-February. Then we'll produce the final report. It'll be online, I hope, by the end of March. And we'll send that report to the county council. And if they request a briefing, then we give them. And then on the next page is for those who don't have my contact information and the website. This is it. I know we haven't sent an e-letter in a while because we've just been working, but once we have the solid planning board date, we'll send out an e-letter. We will be posting, as is customary with all planning board items, we post what we call the staff report about a week beforehand, certainly not less than a week or sometimes a few days more than a week. And in this case, that will include a draft of the report. So we'll make sure everybody will know about that if you're on the e-letter, so you'll have time to look at that report before we present it to the planning board. Thank you everyone for listening. I know it's a little bit long, but that's it.
Tara, thanks very much for your presentation. I think personally there's a lot to chew on in that information, and look forward both to the final report that you will prepare and the conversation that takes place both at planning and subsequently at the county council, assuming that they are going to be interested in hearing about the report. But as we see the final one, maybe we'll think about having you give us a brief presentation about what's different and maybe what's the same down the road, as we also begin to think about the village and to think about how we want to respond to the urban design study and to subsequent development events, which again, as I said at the outset, I think will be forthcoming. Yeah.
I can speak a little bit. I can tell you that in the planning board presentation, we will probably add a few more engagement analyses that we maybe haven't finished yet. And we're going to, I didn't do this here, you guys don't need it, we're going to walk them through a little bit of like, how did Friendship Heights get to be a downtown in like 2 slides? Which here is sort of, you guys have already written a book about it, so I didn't need to present that here. But that we were going to, the planning board, not all the members, some are more and less familiar with Friendship Heights, and so whenever we do anything, we always like to give a little bit more background. We'll have to recap the scope, so it'll be a little bit longer, and we'll definitely cover that demographic analysis there, which we just didn't have finalized enough for me to bring it here, and it's probably another 5 or 10 minutes, so the takeaway is that we didn't find anything shocking really so far, so that was good.
Yeah.
But we'll have to go through all of that. So that's some of the things that will be in there. None of our takeaways from here will change. We just might have some additional meat from the engagement. That's what I expect.
Let me see whether my colleagues have any questions. Councilwoman Tyler, and then Councilwoman Salt, and then Councilman Schaefer.
Thank you for this report. It's very in-depth and very helpful. In fact, some of the things you pointed out we've been discussing in other committees. The only question I have is, in your report, are you also going to make recommendations, or is this just completely what your findings are?
It's a study, and at least in the planning department, when we do a study, we don't make recommendations. Recommendations are solely made in master and sector plans. So we will be summarizing in a similar way to the way I summarized here. It might be a little more in-depth of a summary. We might summarize a little bit more of the engagement, as I said, but it will basically mirror the main takeaways that you saw here.
Councilwoman Salt?
Thank you. It was very informative. Did you look at or consider traffic noise levels? For example, like if you talk about the plaza, like in front of Starbucks on Wisconsin Avenue, it's very noisy. You can't talk to somebody sitting next to you. Some of that goes on Willard Avenue too, but not to the same extent. Was that something you either measured or factored in to your study?
So that is definitely something we heard in engagement. I didn't bring it up here because there's a lot of things I didn't bring up, but some of that will be in the report. We didn't do any kind of measurements. It's definitely an observation. I would say that Wisconsin is probably the noisiest street here, it's the busiest, it has the highest traffic volume. We could certainly note that. I think that's an observation that we did make. And we got a few comments about traffic noise generally on Wisconsin, so we can, that can be one of the things we bring into the final summary, sure.
Councilman Schaefer?
Okay, thank you. A couple of questions. I know you said you didn't do a market study. Was there any focus on housing issues?
This is a public realm study, so
No.
we said at the outset, focusing on public realm, not focused on, any kind of development or market or housing discussion. At some point, hopefully there'll be a sector plan, and that'll be a great time to have all those things come in, but it's just outside of the scope of this particular study.
Okay. And how many people participated?
So I said that, I think, earlier.
Oh.
So we had 75 people come to the open houses and 142 questionnaire respondents. Now, the questionnaire was anonymous, so if people came to the open house and also answered the questionnaire, and there may have been some people like that, I don't know. But in addition, we also went to many meetings. Every time we came here and spoke and people asked questions, I would certainly consider that participating. When we went to Somerset House, for example, the condos, we had about 60 people in the room or 50 people in the room and like 100 people on the Zoom call. And I don't know how many of them, actually ended up participating in the questionnaire, but they asked questions. So it's hard to measure how many people we actually spoke to, but we got responses from around, I'm saying sort of 200-ish as a round number.
Okay. And the last question, the Geico Park, is that actually public or it's just used as a public space?
It's privately owned.
Okay.
Geico obviously doesn't fence it off, and
Right.
we did have one chat with them, and they're fully aware people use it, and they were like totally fine with that. Like they know they have this asset, and they don't mind people are using it on the weekends when they're not there. But it's definitely not a park.
Any other
Thank you.
questions from council members? Yes, Mayor White.
Atara, did you talk with anyone about this green lawn that's in front of the Carrie Winston building? Because it seems like that's a very popular dog park, and I wonder what the impact of that is on the community.
Yes, people filled in. We had like a write-in, where else do you go? And a number of people, it's on that. It's in the chart, 5500 Friendship, right, is the address. An example, another of a big green lawn. There's nothing prohibiting you from using the green lawn. People definitely said that they use that space. Geico was definitely more popular, at least in the responses we got, right, from the sample size we have. But they're in that chart, which I probably can't read from here anyway. There is a number of people who said they use that lawn as well.
And I had one more question for
Sure.
you. Does the county use the term street activation? Does that shift depending on how many stores may be out of business at one time? Like, for example, over on Wisconsin Avenue, there was a stretch of time when there was a lot of empty storefronts there.
Yep. So I'll tell you. So it's definitely an urban design term that we use when we use it in our design guidelines for other downtowns. Actually, I think all of them. It's probably something discussed in all the, in all those. It's something you discuss more in an urban area because it's much easier to achieve, and also that's where you sort of have a denser pedestrian, cohort or whatever. Like more people are walking on the street in those areas, so the impact of what it feels like to walk on the streets is really important. We definitely have dealt with empty storefronts in all of the downtowns, right? What do you do with an empty storefront? So there's just an empty storefront with that's papered over or is just empty. And if you have one after one after one, I agree. That sort of messes with your activation, even if you have great storefronts waiting to be activated. What we've seen happen in other downtowns, just to share, and I think we've talked about this early in design guidelines elsewhere and with other communities, sometimes, the urban district or whoever's in that neighborhood will say, okay, we've got these empty storefronts, let's partner with a community arts organization and get something in those storefronts. Sometimes they use it as a pop-up for something. We've seen that. We've seen that all over the county, certainly in the post-COVID time. And I think those are the kinds of things we would say that's a way to sort of maintain a level. It is obviously not as good as an open store, for sure. But given that challenge that a lot of the downtowns are facing, doing that sort of thing with your vacant storefront can help make it, maintain a level of activity and interest, even when you don't have somebody paying the rent.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Let me see whether there are a couple of questions from members of the audience. Is there anyone who'd like to ask one? Yes, and when you come up, please come up to the microphone and state your name and your address. Thank you.
My name is Barbara Woodall. I live in the Carlton. And from what I understand is we cannot expect recommendations for improvements until there's a sector plan and something. When will that be?
Okay, so actually, now I'm happy to share that the planning board has put the sector plan for this area in their request for the budget year of fiscal year 2025. So right now, it's still a request, and it doesn't get approved until the council takes up the budget, which I believe is in April or May. So it just sits out there, and the planning board will go through more revisions to the budget, et cetera. It's definitely going to be on the budget request. We won't have a definite answer on whether or not we start it in that fiscal year until the council approves the budget. But we've asked for it, or I say the planning board asked for it. So that's the newest update on the sector plan, which, yeah, happy to share.
Mr. Gardner, then Mr. Cuscetti.
My name is Prem Garg. I'm a resident at Carlton. I have one question and one suggestion. My question relates to the level of effort which has gone into the study. Any idea of the budget for this particular Friendship Heights study? How much would you expect to spend by the time it's finished? Okay, and then the suggestion is that really it's an interesting study. The impact would be much more if the visuals were to be somehow enhanced, because it was quite really difficult to follow it on the screen, both because of the font as well as the contrast in the presentation.
Sure. Well, I'll answer the second question. I'll answer it backwards. So, right, this is a PowerPoint, and it's challenging in a PowerPoint, but of course the final report is going to be a PDF that you can download, or you can get a hard copy and page through it, so it'll be a book. And that's always how we end up with all of our planning material. Always turns into a book that you'll be able to either download or get hard copies. If the village wanted a lot of hard copies, we could arrange that. I mean, we could pretty much do anything you want. So I expect it to be more legible when we have the final. It's hard to show maps on a PowerPoint, especially where a lot of people are really far from the screen in this setup. In terms of the budget, so we're county agencies, so when we have staff time working on something, it is not really, there's an overall planning department budget that I don't know the numbers to that, because that's way above my pay grade. We do so many projects at one time. The county approves, in theory, a budget for every division. So the only, the cost to us at all was just the hiring of the consultant, and that was pretty nominal. I think the budget for this project was less than $40,000 in terms of consultant work, with Brick and Story helping us design the questionnaire and come to all the events and design that with us. It was probably more around 30 for this project, yeah.
In terms of staff effort, how many days or weeks or months of effort?
We started in July, and now it's December, and January, and we'll be finished in March. So,
Mr. Cuscetti.
Yes, I'm Roger Cocchetti in the Willoughby North, and thank you for the presentation. I was delightfully surprised. It doesn't take an expert or a lot of research to realize that most urban planners at HUD, in Annapolis, in Rockville, and down in the DC government, when looking at Friendship Heights, view it as if it were an Amazon warehouse for human beings. And we all know that in an Amazon warehouse, if you have floor space that's unused or shelves that are only 2 feet high, you replace them with something that's a tall shelf. You did not evidence any of that tonight. Thank you for that. However, if you look at the DC Planning Department's most recent proposal for Wisconsin Avenue development, they clearly see the area between Tenley and Friendship Heights as an Amazon warehouse for humans that needs tall shelves, not empty floor space. So how are you relating to the DC government and their planning effort, which abuts ours? And there's overlaps in rhetoric, at least, if not in detail. So have you shared this with the DC Planning Department? Do you intend to, or how will that go forward? Thank you.
Sure. So we actually meet with DCOP every month to talk about our efforts that overlap in terms of jurisdictions, or border each other rather, since we don't overlap. I got a tour with DCOP of their area. Frankly, this study, again, was about public realm. We weren't talking about development. We weren't talking about housing. We weren't talking about opportunity sites. We haven't thought about any of that in Friendship Heights yet at all, only if a sector plan is approved on our budget, and then we'll have to put it on a schedule. Then we'll start thinking about those things. So at the moment, I would say the ideas we have about what makes a successful public realm and what pieces of that are in Friendship Heights align with what pieces of the public realm that framework development would like to see happen in the future along Wisconsin. But theirs is a plan. It's an entirely different kind of scope than this study. We're very well aware of what they've proposed. Actually, without getting too much into the DC zoning process, is entirely different than the Montgomery County in one. So it's kind of like apples and oranges, but they are looking at sort of a different list, a longer list of things, I would say, than we're looking at here. So it's not really comparable.
Dr. Mueller.
Well, first of all, thank you for the follow-up. I'm Al Mueller from the Elizabeth. I was particularly pleased to see that you've confirmed what I think we've been saying all along. The amenities that we're proudest of are the walkability, the greenability, and the fact that we can get to most retail fairly easily. I would suggest, though, when you tinker with your presentation, that you put in the presentation, the written part, what you said, because it's a major point and it wasn't covered on the slides, and that was the amenity of the medical care that is here in the village. I tried to make that suggestion when I was part of the group that came at the presentations, and there wasn't any specific question of do you use the medical facilities. It was sort of combined into a whole bunch of other things. I think if you asked our large number of seniors, and since we are the largest next to Leisure World, if you'd asked them, do you use medical facilities in the village, you would have received a ton of people. And that should be in the report, because I think it's very important. The only other comment I have is the obvious one. The green space that's fourth most popular is Geico. Under the old sector plan, and I dare say the new sector plan, that's going to all be removed. I mean, removed completely. It's presently zoned for townhouses and low-rise apartment houses. I dare say the new sector plan and the new county council are not going to make that less green. They're not going to make that more green. They're going to be less green. And the same with that Mayor White pointed out, parcel 4, I think, that great big open lawn is privately owned. And any privately owned green space cannot be presumed to continue. The Willoughby Park is technically privately developed, but the village is responsible for its uptake, and I think the village, under the agreement, that will remain green space. But private space such as Geico and the parcel 4 is open to the county, allowing a lot less green space. So I know you're not making recommendations, but what looks like an amenity is only temporary unless the county doesn't change it.
So thank you for the comment about the medical offices. Actually, our first question in the questionnaire, which I didn't talk about here, is we asked people, what's your relationship to Friendship Heights? And one of the choices you can check off was, I go to the doctor in Friendship Heights. And I will be able to report, again, more in detail on these things, on the percentage of people who checked that off, which I think we should add. You're right. I think that's an important thing. And it is when we would stop, when we were sitting at the table, we'd do that a few times on the street. People would stop and talk to us, and we'd say, why are you here today? And a lot of people would say, I'm coming from a doctor's appointment. So we definitely heard that, and I think it is a very important function because it brings people here from all over the place. And to your other comment, I would say it's when we do a sector plan, we will, of course, do tons of more engagement if that gets approved and we get to start it. But everything we learn here will bring with us into that process. And when we, hear about something that is, much loved somewhere, we always take that into account when making recommendations. Frankly, the approval for the Geico project that's been out there for 20-something years, that's probably, that isn't even sort of marketable in today's market, what that proposal represented. I don't, so I have no idea what the sector plan will do about that parcel, but it definitely won't be what is approved now. That approval expires, I think, right in the next fiscal year, actually. So, it's I have no clue, but I would say certainly in other recent sector plans, when there are community assets that people feel very strongly about, usually the planning team tries to figure out how do we both, identify sector goals, but also identify sort of what we would call, keeping things that are important to the community, and that's always a balance. I'd have no clue how that will play out, since we haven't given any thought to anything other than what we've represented here, but thank you for your comment.
Tara, I'm going to end the conversation now. We've got a lot of other items on the agenda tonight. If others have questions, please send them in to info@friendshipheightsmd.gov, and we will forward them to Atara and see how we can put the responses out to village residents. So let me thank you again. Thank you also for dropping the tidbit that the planning department is proposing to the county council that the sector plan should be revised here. And we'll look to see how that plays out.
So yes.
Thanks again.
Thank you. My
Yep.
pleasure to be here.
Moving on to the next agenda item, I have a few comments to make, and they briefly address 4 items. One is Page Park. Second is the Red House. Third is our quality of life survey. And fourth is filling the council vacancy. On the Page Park update, I personally think that we're making progress towards opening the park. We're learning what Montgomery County Department of Permitting Services will require for its permit to be issued. Nearly all of the reviewers at the county department have provided their comments. Some haven't. The village and Green Sweep, the village's contractor responsible for submitting the permit application and work in the park to date, have begun to address some of the requirements. As reported at December's meeting, our land use attorney filed the necessary papers to consolidate the 2 properties on which Page Park used to sit. It's now a single property with 1 tax ID number. The consolidation makes sense. Our application was approved, and the pergola and park hardscape no longer cross a property line. Electrical issues related to the solar power unit on the site are in the process of being resolved, but remaining issues waiting to be resolved and waiting to be understood to some extent concern railings and the concrete poured to support the pergola. Both of those issues are now the subject of discussion between Green Sweep and the county. There may, and I want to stress may, have been a misunderstanding by the reviewer of what documents have already been submitted as part of the permit application, or it may also be the case that our contractor didn't file documentation as he should have. At any rate, assuming a positive attitude is adopted by Green Sweep and others in our interactions with county officials, we may shortly understand exactly what's necessary to receive our permit, and then begin to understand the costs, if any, and related to the final steps to open the park. As I said at the beginning, I think this is progress, and I've said before, these unfortunate delays were entirely preventable and not the fault of the County Department of Permitting Services. I know from conversation with many residents that they, like all council members, are eager to remove the orange fencing and put the park to use. I've asked the village manager to provide some additional details during his comments, as he has them, about any more recent updates during his own report, and specifically to address, if there is more information, requests from a constituent to say what's known about the structural, architectural, and safety reviews. The second item relates to the Red House. And as you know from previous conversation here and individually with many of you, we haven't been successful finding the kind of tenant for the business that residents have prioritized. But we are discussing tonight under old business whether to keep the real estate company which has had responsibility to identify a client to occupy the Red House, or whether to follow our current broker to a new firm in Virginia. First, priorities for a Red House occupant remain a coffee shop and a bakery or retail food outlet. However, absent any success identifying an entrepreneur to pursue that vision with us, we may want to provide expanded latitude going forward to whatever broker we choose following expiration or extension of the present contract. Third, the quality of life survey. First, thank you to those who responded to the survey. I know I'm looking forward to looking at the results. The extended period to respond is closed now, and first reports are beginning to be prepared. And raffle winners will be selected randomly from among those respondents who completed the entire survey. We hope to be able to present preliminary reports during February's council meeting. And I know that one or more committees of the council may be interested in making use of the data, as the council is. The item I announced tonight at the start of the council meeting, which was the data use agreement, we'll have some discussion about that, but provides the terms, conditions, and deliverables for our continued work with faculty and student at George Washington University. And fourth, filling the council vacancy. Candidates interested in filling the vacant council position had until late this afternoon to submit a letter of interest, along with any other materials they wish to submit. As described at December's meeting, the council will now proceed to review materials and interview candidates. A majority vote of council is necessary to identify the candidate who will be nominated to county council for their concurrence. Assuming no unexpected challenges confront the council, a vote by the village council is expected at February's council meeting on whom to nominate. And I'll take this opportunity to thank those who have submitted expressions of interest. Those who have served and those who are serving understand the challenges of being a public official. And to have people in the village of Friendship Heights willing to step forward and help us be responsible stewards for the governance of the village, appreciate those people. So let me turn now to those who want to address the council. I don't have the sign-in sheet. So, just-in-time delivery. Thank you. Yeah. There are 4 people who wish to address the council. The first one, as listed, is Dorsey. So please come to the podium, state your full name and address, and then you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Excuse me. Mike Dorsey, 4620 North Park. Mr. Pastrunk, at your opening comments last month, you felt the need, apparently, during those comments, which should have been left to just the unfortunate situation that took place, to point out certain grievances that the council member had with past council members and some of the residents in the past. Every person in here, resident, is a taxpayer and has a right and a First Amendment, as a taxpayer and a First Amendment right to have their say. If a council member, past or present, doesn't want to hear what the residents have to say or how they say it, they may be in the wrong line of business. So I'm suggesting that in the future, if I hear any of you newcomers, yourself, Mr. Schaefer, Ms. Tyler, or Ms. Solt, who are new to the council, having grievances with past council members, at least identify their names. If they have grievances with residents, then you're totally out of line. So in the future, if I hear something like that, what I will do is bring the history out. I'll talk about lack of social justice. lack of transparency. I'll talk about people that must not, that don't like questions about finances, either aren't prepared, don't know the job, or have something to hide. So to suggest that that elected officials have grievances against residents speaking their mind is totally out of line, and that's what I intend to do. So if you want that on the floor to talk about past council members, a couple of the past treasurers, or the past recording secretaries, I'll be glad to do it. So if you want to roll that out again, do it.
The second person who has asked to speak is Roger Cacchetti.
Thanks. Roger Cocchetti from the Willoughby North. And two quick points I want to start with. First, kudos to whoever came up with the idea of the battery drop-off. It's a fabulous idea. I would hope somebody could look into the possibility of a secure way to do shredder drop-off. So it's not just twice a year, but there's a place where you can come and drop off shredding, and it would be very convenient. Second, I wanted to compliment the council and the chair for identifying that the meeting with the Geico management that was reported on at the last meeting. For those who don't know, Geico is owned by Berkshire Hathaway, the Warren Buffett created company that is famous for unlocking hidden value. And Buffett even wrote about the acquisition of Geico as having tremendous hidden value. Those of us who live in Friendship Heights can imagine what hidden value means. The chances that Geico management would tell us ahead of time what they're planning to do are slim to none, but it is important to show them that there is a watchman watching what they're doing, so I'd hope we continue to do that. I am also, I think it's important on that same point to emphasize that, from my point of view at least, your job is to represent the interests of the people who live in Friendship Heights. Not the interest of humankind, not the interest of everybody in the United States, not the interest of everybody in Montgomery County, and not the interest of everybody in Maryland. Nobody else is looking out for the interest of people who live here except you. And the shining example of that to me is how things work in Tacoma Park, which is about 3 times larger than Friendship Heights, but about 300 times more influential. 2 years ago, the planning department, Montgomery County, proposed that a 2-story building be constructed in Tacoma Park, a brand new 2-story building. Well, this was outrageous to the Tacoma Park Council. It didn't fit in with the decor. And in the end, the planning board rejected the proposal by unanimous vote. Guess who the new chair of the planning board, where that chair lives today? Anyway, I'd hope you guys stay vigilant on these planning discussions and laser focused on what is in the interest of the people who live here, because no one else is doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Mayor White, I don't know whether you recognize. There's a third person who signed in whose name I can't read, and I have a fourth person who has signed in who is Cameron Mooney. But it looks like, is there someone else besides Mr. Mooney who signed up to speak? Let me assume not, and then if that person, yeah. So, Mr. Mooney, I see you next.
Hi, I'm Cameron Moody, and I'm in the Elizabeth. I just wanted to give kudos to the presentation we got today. I think that it highlighted a lot of opportunities for improvement. I think one of the ones I hadn't considered was that I very rarely use the Hills Plaza. I think I knew it was because of all of the curb cuts and the blank walls. Likewise, I find that I'll often walk all the way around North Park as opposed to going down Willard. Mostly because of the blank wall that's the parking garage of 4620, more so than the traffic. But I think that that's an easy way to highlight the fact that we have information that we can take from this study. Very similarly, I don't use Brookdale Park very often because although I know where the path is, I find that it's not quite accessible to me here. I think that it's a great opportunity to take this information and maximize it. I think that it's not very likely that the county and or the village is going to be able to finance and act on all of these opportunities. So whether you or not you're a fan of the potential for development, it's going to be important that we don't view it as a us versus them, you know, a David versus Goliath, you know, Geico's coming to get us. But we have to really use this, leverage it to get what we want. Working on the assumption that there will be development going forward, we're going to have to leverage this opportunity. We're going to have to tell them we have something you want, the density, etc. And this is going to be our asks. I look at places like Westbard, which I never went to unless I was going to and from Giant, and for no other reason. I look at the Chevy Chase Lake area, which I've never gone to in my 15 years living in Chevy Chase, except to stop to get gas. And as the spring comes, I'm going to look forward to spending time in those places. It's the same with City Ridge on Wisconsin Avenue. There was no reason for me to go there. These sad, worn shopping centers, these sad, worn parking lots, they don't draw people in. I also want to really warn people against leaning too heavily into the medical office thing. As a healthcare professional who did some of their training at Johns Hopkins, I can tell you as a world-renowned facility, which is actually probably the most beautiful hospital I've ever been to, I've always told people, you don't say I'm going to Baltimore to go visit Johns Hopkins. Nobody comes to a place for medical unless they're going and leaving. It's a historic facility. It's a beautiful facility. It's world-renowned, but
Mr. Moody, I'm
it
going
doesn't
to
draw people in.
ask you to end your comments. Thank you.
So, again, I'm going to sum it up as please look at this as an opportunity for improvement and an opportunity to have some give and take.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next item on the agenda then, which is the approval of the minutes for the December 11th council meeting. Councilwoman Salt.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry.
Mayor's announcement.
I'm sorry. Excuse me. Comments from the council. Thank you, Village Manager. Are there comments from the council? Thank you. Then the mayor's announcements. Mayor White, sorry to skip you.
All residents are invited to join us for our annual Winter Festival community event on Saturday, February 3rd at 10:30 a.m. at the Village Center. Check this month's newsletter for more information. The shredding truck will return to the village on Saturday, January 20th from 10 a.m. to noon. Residents are invited to use this free service. That's it.
Thank you. What time, Ellen?
The 20th from 10 a.m. to noon. Saturday, January 20th.
So then let's move on to the approval of the minutes. Councilwoman Salt.
Thank you. The minutes are behind tab 2. There's a slight amendment to the last page, last bullet. Should say this item was moved for reconsideration pending more information on the new policy and the comparison to the previous policy, which will be presented at the January 8th council meeting. So I am moving that these minutes as amended be approved.
Is there support? Councilman Schaefer? Yes, okay.
Excuse me, on the bottom of the, under old business, where it says Mr. Schaefer moved to increase the holiday rate. Yeah, I moved to reduce the holiday rate.
Which bullet is that?
It's at the bottom of the page.
Oh, I see, okay.
So there's been an amendment. There've been
Got it.
There have been two amendments that have been proposed. Are there any further amendments? Is there support for those amendments? And Councilwoman Tyler, as proposed, then the minutes for December 11th council meeting as amended, that's been moved and supported. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed, same sign. The motion passes unanimously. That brings us to the treasurer's report. Councilman Schaefer.
Okay, thank you. I was going to say this last. I'm going to say it first. I have office hours by appointment. I've never refused a request from anyone to meet with me. I don't intend to. Some of the people I've met with are in this room. So I'm not sure what was implied, but I'm not refusing ever to meet with someone. Okay, now I'll start my report. So last month we had a meeting with the Maryland Controller's Office. It's sort of the kickoff event for the budget process. And based on what they told us, the village's income tax revenue share for the current year is going to be $55,000 less than what we projected in the budget. That's about 4%. It's not that there was a problem with the budget. The main reason for the reduction was that we had fewer of the income earners at the highest levels filing tax returns. So even a few individuals, it's going to trickle down to us. And for next year, based on what they told us, we're projecting $32,000 less in revenue. This is the income tax piece, less than we budgeted for this year. That's okay. And as far as our other major line items, the property tax revenue will be flat to maybe up about $10,000. The gas tax revenue, we talked about this last month, it is going to drop. We don't have the final number yet, but it's $80,000 now. It could be half that. So the bottom line for next year is we will be projecting for next year's budget less revenue than we projected for this year. And that's really out of our control. It's just a question of what's collected and what gets forwarded to us. The flip side of that are our expenses, which are not going down. Our largest expense is payroll and benefits. We don't have that number yet. We need a recommendation from the Personnel Committee. That recommendation goes to the full council, and then we vote on that. So that hasn't happened yet. Our second largest expense is the shuttle, which has an escalation, is 3%, I think. So, and our third largest expense is the security contract, which is our second biggest contract. That's going up because it's tied to the increase that the officers who work for us get. Our contract with the ticket vendor, which if you were here last month, that went up substantially. We're incurring unanticipated legal and other expenses from Page Park, which we don't know the amount. I think they're going to wind up being substantial. I hope I'm wrong. And finally, and I've mentioned this before, we are going to include expenses that we've always had. They're not new expenses, but they haven't been in the budget. So that's going to be brought in. So where it shakes out is we have a structural deficit. And by that I mean, if we don't do anything, our expenses are going to exceed our revenue. So we have some tough decisions to make. And I'll just talk a little bit about how we're addressing that. One of the things we're doing is we're really taking a very close look at our contracts. And every contract we're asking, do we even need it? And if we do, can we do better? We had an example of each of that last month when the vendor contract came up, the ticket vendor. It's the sixth time it came up for renewal. And for the first time in 6 years, we are rewriting that contract under terms that are better for us, and we're also putting it out for bids. And so we'll see where we wind up on that. An example of a contract we didn't need, we used to have a service come here every month and take minutes at our meeting. They sat with the village managers. That contract expired December. And the secretary said, we don't need that contract. The secretary takes notes, the village manager takes notes. We don't need to pay several $100s a month to have another person take notes. And that's why there's nobody there. We just let that contract expire. So that brings me to the upcoming Finance Committee meetings. There's a meeting scheduled for Thursday, January 18th at 3 p.m. and a February meeting, February 13th at 9 a.m. I'd like to thank the Finance Committee members and the staff for working with me to schedule that. These meetings are open, and by open, I don't mean just open to the public. They're interactive. People can ask questions. People can make comments. There will be a preliminary budget at that meeting, but it's very preliminary. It will, I expect, change quite a bit between the January meeting and the final budget. There's some other administrative things taking place at that meeting. We're hopefully going to approve a travel policy. We're going to talk about maybe instituting a contracts policy. We will be possibly talking a little bit about the shuttle, which I won't say too much because I think that's separate on the agenda. And we're going to talk about establishing a capital reserve fund, which is something that we've needed for a while. And I'll try to help us catch up on schedule. So I'll leave it at that. So I hope to see you at the January 18th meeting, and if you'd like to meet with me, you could check the website for my contact information. Thank you.
Any questions from the council about the treasurer's report? Councilman Mizzi, yep, and then Councilwoman Tyler.
I want to thank Roy for his really diligent work on the issue of the contracts and looking in particular at the contracts and all of that. It's been very helpful for us, and I think will in the end save us some money. Roy and I have had conversations. We have a somewhat different view of the financial, slightly different view of the financial status of the village and whether or not we really have what amounts to a budget crisis. But we'll talk about that at the Finance Committee meeting. I would suggest, however, that we might also consider something that the United States Congress never considers when it deals with structural deficits, and that is to raise taxes. For years and years, we have, I know lightning is going to hit me on the head here, but for years and years, we've had a tax rate that was the lowest tax rate we were allowed to charge. We couldn't go any lower than that. It seems to me that if the village and its residents have needs and for programs, for services, for safety measures, a large set of needs that they would like the village to meet, we might consider asking the village to pay for those. Again, Congress never seems to do that. The American people have lots of needs and wants, but they want somebody else to pay for them. So I'd be willing to put that on the table when we talk about our financial situation at the Finance Committee meeting.
Okay, I don't think I said crisis, but.
Well, your tone was sort of crisis-y.
Councilwoman Tyler.
I just wanted to be sure on clarification when you said the largest budgets we have are payroll, the shuttle, and then you lumped security all together. So the ticketing, that's Securitas you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay, so Securitas, and then the contract with the police. Montgomery County.
I'm sorry if I said it wrong. It's the payroll and related. Second is the shuttle. Third is the village security.
And the village security.
I did not include Securitas in that.
Okay, that's what I want to
Okay,
understand.
right,
So
'cause
village security is the police.
And only the police. yeah.
Okay, that's why I
No,
wanted
that's
to
fine.
clear it.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions for the treasurer? Seeing none, we'll move on to the village manager's report. Village manager?
Yeah, update. Well, not much more of an update on Page Park. From the chairman's comments, you pretty much covered it pretty well. I would just add that the zoning review as of now has been approved based on the lot consolidation. If you look on the website, you'll see that one is listed as approved now, with the contractor having submitted that information about the lot consolidation. The architectural and the structural, he did have Jed from Green Sweep had extensive conversations with the reviewers, and I think a lot of it, at least according to Jed, is stuff that he's already submitted that they just need to review more closely. But so he's hopeful that that will be resolved. The architectural has a number of issues that are still need clarification as to their applicability, and he has not connected as of today with the architectural review. He's put in a request to follow up with that person, so that we're hopeful that will happen soon. Quick update on 5500 Wisconsin project, the apartment building on Wisconsin at South Park. We did get a comment from Mr. Donahoe, Jed Donahoe, the principal with Donahoe Construction, who's the lead developer, that the construction has been delayed because of the interest rate situation, the financial situation with financing. It was anticipated, I believe we heard this last year, that it was going to start in the first quarter of 2024, which would be right around now. But he has indicated there is, they're just basically holding in a holding pattern to see how the interest rates continue to move down, and hopefully with interest rates falling that they will be able to start that as soon as they can. But for now, it's sort of a delay phase, for lack of a better word. That's it for me.
Thank you, Village Manager Mansfield. Any questions for the Village Manager? Seeing none, we'll go on to,
We had talked about maybe scheduling a meeting with the county over the park. Is there any progress on that?
The county indicated they would rather not have a general meeting with all of the reviewers. They typically don't do that as part of their process, so they encouraged our contractor to reach out individually to each of the reviewers, and that's what he's been doing. So that's really the process. It's possible we could need a meeting if there's no further progress, but according to the county, this is how they would prefer the process to move forward.
Okay.
Councilman Mazie.
Julian, would you want to clarify the delay in regard to 5500 with our anticipated payment for the air rights from the Red House, and whether that delay will have any impact on our ability to collect that money?
So the settlement agreement, which the previous council worked out with Donahoe, has a clause in it that requires payment of the $1 million that's currently being held in escrow. And again, this was a payment from the developer to the village in exchange for the density rights to the Red House of 4608 North Park. That money has been held in escrow ever since the agreement was finalized. The clause in the agreement states that the money will be transferred to the village either at the time of a building permit issuance by the county or 2 years after the site plan approval. And we confirmed that site plan approval was in May of 2023. So by May of 2025 at the latest, we would have the $1 million. And I should clarify, it's the earlier of those two events is what triggers the payment. Either the building permit issued or the 2 years after the site plan approval.
And that money comes even if they are delayed in their building permit?
If they have not started anything by May of 2025, we still get the $1 million, yes.
Any other questions? Okay. So we've got committee reports on the agenda. As we've mentioned at a past meeting, we're no longer approving those minutes from the meetings. Those are approved by the committees themselves. But let me just see whether the chairs of those committees wish to make any comments. First on the Public Safety Committee, Councilwoman Tyler.
I'll be brief. The Safety Committee has been meeting a lot, and we have several more meetings this month. We're waiting for, we sent out RFPs to get price quotes on the new lighting, strips being painted, the sidewalks being painted, not sidewalks, I'm sorry, the crossings, and the speed humps. And so those RFP bids should be in sometime early this month, and we will have a decision on who we choose for that. But the work will not start until the spring, and that's because of the weather and the paint adhering, and so we have to wait for that. So we hope to have that in soon. We are also, invitations went out to the business representatives, the managers, developers in our village area of the business district and also of our properties here. And we are meeting with the police, the managers, and hopefully county representatives to talk about security issues and concerns going on in the village and on the peripheral edges of the village. So once we have that meeting, we'll be able to hopefully give a good report back. And also the safety committee and other representatives from the council and the village manager, we attended the first joint Friendship Alliance Safety Committee meeting with MPD and Montgomery County and federal state officials. So we are trying to make that impact, to have a voice at the table and be seen and be heard on our issues proactively and not reactively.
Thank you, Councilwoman Tyler. Councilwoman Solt, is there anything from the Communications Committee meeting that you'd like to report?
Yeah, we met on January 4th, and we discussed and agreed to advance to the council here today a policy on security cameras, and that's under new business, so you'll hear more.
Great, thank you very much. That takes us into old business. And Julian, Village Manager Mansfield, let me turn to you to tee this one up. Discussion of the broker for the village-owned Red House property at 4608 North Park Avenue.
Yeah, so we have been in a current agreement with Compass Realtor to list the Red House, and that agreement expires in March of 2024. The broker that we have been using, Deb Marzano, announced recently that she is switching to a new brokerage firm in Virginia and had expressed interest in continuing to be the broker and carry our listing with her to the new firm. I did receive some feedback from council members that they would be more comfortable with, continuing with Compass as a local firm here through the end of this agreement. So I reached back out to Compass and was connected back to the original broker that we started with at Compass, who referred us to Deb Marzano, and his name is Al Charbonneau, and he is still willing to continue the listing. And just today we received an extension from him. If the council's interested in continuing with him, he is proposing extension through December of 2024 of the current agreement that would expire in March. And he's also promised to come up with a very aggressive marketing campaign, in his words, and he would be eager to meet with us and carry through with looking for a tenant for the house.
Thank you. Are there questions or discussion? Yes.
Yeah,
Councilman
Compass is primarily a residential broker. Have we spoken with any commercial brokers?
Not since we've been with Compass, but Compass
Right.
has a commercial side to it, and this particular individual has some restaurant background as well.
I mean, I'm sure they do. They're not really known for that. So if there are a couple of, even just walking by a for rent sign and getting the name of someone.
Yeah, the ones, the main ones here are with JBG, where they seem to do their own in-house brokerage, the retail space at the corner there. But we haven't spoken to another firm directly. But Compass is willing to continue with us. And we would have the option of canceling the Compass agreement pretty much at any time as well. There's an opt-out clause at any time during the period of the agreement.
Well, I know the prior one had a clause, we pay the marketing expenses. if we
Which
terminate
she waived.
Right,
So
but is that in the new agreement?
it would maintain
Right,
in the new
so
agreement.
I just feel more comfortable if we spoke to at least one commercial broker who specializes in commercial space.
Other comments from the council? Councilwoman Tyler.
Our contract number 1 with Compass runs out in March, correct? Or May?
March 3rd, I believe.
So Compass, I am familiar with Compass and their business side and the commercial side. They do have one, a pretty strong one in the district. But I think it would behoove us to have a meeting with them sooner than later to hear their presentation and what they want to do And I don't have a problem in comparing them with another, if somebody knows another real estate company that specializes in commercial business as well, so that we have one to compare with. But I do know Compass does do a great deal of commercial in the district. So,
And
but I'd
just-
like to meet with them sooner than later. if
And just to
possible.
clarify, this individual does specialize in commercial and restaurants. So, I mean, we could bring him in to speak with the council or
Yeah.
set up a separate meeting.
I think it would behoove it so that we don't make a rash decision to say, go ahead and continue until December, but let's hear what they have to say before the contract runs out.
Sure.
That's just me.
Are there others who have comments to make or have reflections on the suggestions that have been made? It seems to me that certainly one of the things we ought to do is either in some committee or at a council meeting. Our next council meeting is early February, so it may be something earlier than that, is to ask Mr. Charbonneau to come in and tell us what a more aggressive plan to market it looks like. And that would help us make a decision about whether we want to continue him through December or whether we just want to let the contract go. But we, from conversations with and comments that have been made at previous council members, there's not an interest in having no representation for a period of time. So how would you suggest we address that?
I would suggest we could bring him in at the February council meeting. I mean, he's planning to do a thorough review of the house because he hasn't seen it since we first started. He's indicated he's going to come up with a marketing plan, so we'll probably need to give him a little time to do that. He has put his name in front of, on the sign for now because we're still within the 1-year period of the Compass agreement, so that expires in March. So he technically would be representing us if anything were to come up. And then we can have him present and answer questions from the council at the next council meeting.
And
We could try to arrange it before that if necessary, but if not, the council meeting would certainly be a good opportunity because it's before the end of the expiration of the agreement.
And what about the possibility of identifying another potential broker and asking for a presentation as well? That's not an area where I have particular expertise to identify someone, but maybe what council members could do who have experience is to recommend someone.
Misa, you were going to talk.
Yeah.
No, I don't have.
Councilwoman Tyler?
I'll say this, in this particular area, the DMV area, you're going to have commercial and residential always working together. It's just some companies have had more experience in commercial than others have. But to my knowledge, and real estate agents that I'm familiar with, there's no one company that just delves into commercial unless, like Julian said, that they do it in-house, and that's it. So you really aren't going to find that. You're going to find a combination. My thing is that I think it would behoove us to try and meet sooner than February, because then we don't have time to talk again. So then we meet and listen to them, and then we got to make a vote, and I don't think that helps us. I think if they have a presentation to talk to us about, I think they could talk to the council, and we could meet with them so that we understand and get our act together and have the questions we want to ask them as well, instead of it being here and let's start throwing darts at the person right away. I think we need to be more organized.
Why don't we think about, for example, at the pleasure of, if this meets the approval of council, of maybe scheduling a development committee meeting, and to which anyone could attend, and ask for a presentation from Mr. Charbonneau there. That may make the scheduling easier, potentially, because there are fewer people on that committee than on the council. But it also would, as Councilwoman Tyler has said, maybe to get that presentation before the February council meeting. Councilwoman Salt?
I question whether that's really the purview of the development committee. It seems a little out of scope. Is there another?
Would you like to suggest another committee? That was the one that came to mind. It is a development issue within and and kind of the surrounding area. Village Manager Mansfield?
Parks and Grounds Committee, I don't, but that's possibly a stretch as well. I mean, Development Committee would at least,
I think it's the council, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it's the council really, and that's why I say I think the council needs to get together to figure out what it is that we really want to ask the person. Yes, we know what the findings were from the survey. We know what the residents in the community wanted. But I also think we have learned from this. If we haven't, we should pay close attention of administrative issues that we have of concern. And I think that's where we need to build our questions to make sure we're asking them and not just say, so what kind of business are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? The typical. We really need to know what we want to know from this person.
So, Councilwoman Tyler, how would you propose we go about doing that? If it is a meeting of council, one would have to be scheduled between now and February in order to do it earlier than February. And then we would have to be prepared to discuss that issue.
I'm not trying to make this real difficult, but I think if we can come up with, we've done it before, we can submit questions with Julian and Jason of things that you want to know. If you have 3 questions that you want to know, submit them so that we can all bring in everybody's question. And once we have a pool of the questions, then we can send it back to everybody and say, okay, these are things that we're looking at. Anybody have a comment? And then let's move it. And don't draw this out so long.
And then address it at the February council meeting?
No, if we bring the person in to talk.
In response to the questions
Yeah.
that we've asked. So what you're suggesting is that we do some preliminary work. We could ask ourselves to suggest questions that Mr. Charbonneau could address at the February council meeting and have a presentation there?
Wherever you want to do it, but as long as we're all on the same page. What I don't want to see is we've got one person standing up here and we're going to throw a million questions at them, and then people from the audience are going to throw the questions as well, and then we aren't looking at another person either, or another company. So we need to iron all this out before we ask this person or anybody else to come and do a presentation before the community, because I don't think it's fair to do that.
Yep. Councilman Easy.
Can I ask a clarification? Because I thought I heard Julian say that the current arrangement is a yearly thing. It expires when?
current arrangement expires in the beginning of March. And then he's already given us a proposed extension through December.
And what happens with that extension? We are then, if it's extended through whatever, we can't cancel at that point.
Oh, sure, we can cancel anytime, no matter who we're dealing with, and under any agreement, we can cancel with not much notice, no matter what.
It seems to me if that's the case, and that's why I was curious, then why are we rushing this? I mean, why can't we extend Charbonneau while at the same time looking for other people? And then at some point, if it's April or May, and we decide, gee, we're not happy, nothing's happening, we found these other people who we've talked to, and it looks like they may be better, we can just thank Charbonneau for his work and cancel the agreement and move on to somebody else, rather than trying to shoehorn all of this into the next couple of weeks here.
Councilwoman Tyler.
I don't have a problem extending. That's not my issue. My issue is that I think we as the council need to know what we want to ask the person to do. That's the issue, because if we're going to sit here and just wait and say, well, let's see what he does, we're not being fair to the residents, and we're not being fair to the person, whoever they are. So I think we, as the council, need to know what we want to ask them to do.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let me ask at the pleasure of the council to, first of all, recommend to the village manager that he sign the extension with Mr. Charbonneau, since that will give us continuous representation until December. And as Councilman Measy has helped to inform us, we can cancel the contract at any point from now until the end of the year, if we're not happy. In the meantime, authorizing him to do that, we can see if we can have a presentation from him at the February council meeting, just to see what he's thinking about. Or, I'm fine with this too, we'll collect questions from council members and others who might suggest it as a result of hearing this meeting, and we'll present him with a series of questions and bring him in either in February or at some other point to answer those questions. And third, we can ask the village manager, again, with suggestions that anyone on council or anyone attending the meeting wants to make, to see whether there is another broker that might more appropriately represent us. And given that we have representation until the end of December, we can, if necessary, hear another presentation. That's what I'd recommend we do under these circumstances. And in the meantime, if we do that, the council can have further conversations about how they want to approach this. Councilwoman Salt.
I think you mentioned a few things, and could you restate what you're suggesting?
Yeah, what I'm suggesting.
And before you do that, I'd like to say I am in favor of submitting questions, so
right,
we
okay.
don't have a
So here's what I'm
hapless
suggesting we do. I'm
presentation.
suggesting we authorize the village manager to sign the extension with Compass. That's one thing. The second thing I'm suggesting we do is within the next week or 2 weeks, we ask council members what questions they would have, and we submit those to the village manager. And for those who are listening to this meeting, if they have suggestions about things that the council might ask, we ask them to suggest those too. And in the meantime, between now and then, council members can also talk with residents and see what they would suggest. That's the second thing that I'm recommending. And the third thing I'm recommending, because we are, if we follow the first recommendation, we are extending the contract, that at some point when we have given Compass our suggested questions, we invite him back to make a presentation to council about our questions and his aggressive marketing plan.
I mean, I agree with what you said, but I just hope we don't make this an administrative exercise. We want to get the place leased. That's our goal, to an appropriate entity, and not put too many obstacles in the way. We want the most aggressive helper to do that, so. It's hard, we talk about all these steps, but the goal is getting the thing leased, because it's been sitting there, and it's not good.
So I think I could speak for all council members to say that we share that last opinion. So does anybody have any problem with what I've recommended? Then let's just go forward and do that. Which takes us to the next item on the agenda, and I'll turn to Mayor White for this. This is a discussion and vote on additional nominees for the Ad Hoc Committee on Climate Change and Environment, and the designation of a council liaison to the committee. Mayor White?
Thank you. We do have some additional applications for the Committee on Climate Change and Environment. One is from a Mr. Rodrigo Valderrama. We also have an application from Emmanuel De Silva and Christine Nauer. And of those three, I am recommending that we place on the committee Christine Nauer and Emmanuel De Silva. I am not in favor of putting a non-resident on this citizens committee, and that would be Valderrama, Rodrigo Valderrama is not a resident of Friendship Heights. I am not in favor of appointing non-residents to the committee. And I also had a question for the village manager, because at the last meeting, we were going to confirm whether or not Alicia Bynum, is she a resident, Julian?
Yes,
She
yeah,
is a
4615 North Park, yes,
Yeah.
we confirmed.
So Alicia was provisionally confirmed last month, but this month I would recommend that the 2 residents be appointed to the committee. If Mr. Rodrigo Valderrama would like to participate as a member of the public, I think that's fine. But, and I did consider his application, he has a very impressive resume, but I think as a community, we do not want to get in the habit of putting non-residents on committees. I don't think we want to go down that path. And that would be my recommendation in the form of a motion.
Is there support for that motion?
Do you want me to move, is it Melanie's motion?
It's Melody's motion.
I second it.
Okay. Is there discussion about the, Councilwoman Tyler?
I just have one question. How many people are on the committee now?
With the
If we
addition-
take these.
With the addition of the 2 new people tonight, I believe we were at 8.
Okay, and that's also including the person that was
Provisionally,
provisional?
yes, yes.
Okay, so a total of 8 then if we
Yes,
take the 2 now?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So I would like to ask for a separation. I'm going to move for a separation to vote on these nominees individually, the people who have submitted. And Mayor White, if that's, would you recommend them in the order in which you would like to add them, and then the person that you're not recommending? So we have a separate vote on each.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's see. Christine Nauer, I move that we appoint her to the Ad hoc Citizens Committee on the Environment and Climate.
Is there support for that nomination? Councilman Measy, is there discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. The motion carries.
I move that we nominate Emmanuel De Silva to the Committee on Climate Change.
Is there support for Mr. Silva? Councilwoman Tyler? Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. And finally...
I'm sorry, aye.
Okay, finally,
And I am not making another motion for
Okay.
this, for nominations to this committee.
okay. I will make a motion.
I don't think you're permitted
Yeah,
under the,
so let's see whether there's another, in order to get it considered,
What are we doing now?
where I'm looking to see whether there is a motion to recommend,
De Silva?
no, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I think the mayor makes the appointments to the committees.
and the motion has
Yeah.
been separated to consider each of the applicants separately. So there's a third applicant, which is Rodrigo Valderrama, and what I'd like to do is to have the council vote on that individual separately as we voted on the other one.
But the mayor needs to appoint
Right.
members to committees. Another council member is not allowed to do that.
It does take, the council must approve what's been recommended.
Sorry. My understanding of the procedure is that the mayor nominates, and they are appointed with the advice and consent of the council, but that it's not my understanding that the council or other members of the council can nominate people to be on the committee. At least that's always how it's been in this. So I think that's how the bylaws are written.
Okay, so not, you're not recommending Mr. Valderrama
Right.
to the committee?
That is correct.
Okay. So I will just say that had we had a vote, I would have supported Mr. Valderrama because I have talked with him, know about his background and experience, and think that despite the fact that he is not a resident of the community, that he would make a valuable contribution to the committee. And this committee can have people from outside of the Friendship Heights Village. So we have appointed 2 people to the committee, and are there any further discussion? Council liaison, or, yeah.
You know, I understand your point, Bobby. We talked about this, I think, when we talked about the design of the committee. I think if one feels that this person has something to contribute, it's an open committee meeting. He can come, he can talk. The only thing not being on the committee is he doesn't have a vote, and I'm not sure that there's going to be a lot of voting going on in this particular committee. So if you think that he has something to contribute, invite him to come.
Okay.
That's exactly what I stated in the beginning, is that we could invite him to be a member of the public at these committee meetings. I do not feel that non-residents should be appointed to village committees, regardless of whether they're citizen committees, council committees. I just don't think that's a road we want to go down.
Okay, so there's one, unless there's further discussion on this, Councilwoman Tyler?
My question was, do we have to officially take the person who is in the provisional role into a complete role?
She was in a provisional role because we had to confirm her residency, and we have confirmed that.
Okay.
So she is a full-fledged
Okay.
committee member. The one thing we do need to do tonight is to appoint a committee liaison with a council member. If there is any council member who would like to volunteer for that position, and know that if we do, okay, if you truly want to do it permanently, that's fine, but when we appoint the new village council member, if they have a burning desire to take this on, it's up to you. If you want to do it permanently, that's fine.
I would never deprive someone of their burning desire, okay? Especially when it came to a committee of the council. So I'll just throw my name in the hat if it's useful. So.
Great. Thank you, Martha.
So there's been a motion to appoint Councilwoman Salt as the liaison to the committee, the Climate Change Environment Committee.
I don't know that we need to do that formally. I think it's just
Is
an
there
agreement.
anybody who wants to make any comments about that? That's fine with me.
Okay.
So thank you, Councilwoman Salt, for volunteering for that position. I think there'll be interesting conversations among that group. Moving on to the discussion and vote on the Public Information Act policy. This was returned to this meeting in January, following some discussion about it in December. And Councilwoman Salt, you were the one who offered this as a motion the last time and withdrew it so it could be returned following some additional information. Would you like to move it again? And
Yes, I'd like to move it again, and I'd like a little guidance of how much detail you would like. I can do a detailed briefing, a quick thing, we could just vote, as the council wishes.
well, let me ask whether you've made the motion
I've
to
made-
adopt the policy. Let me see if there's
Yes,
support for
I move to
that.
adopt the new public information policy.
Is there support for that motion? Okay, Councilwoman Tyler. Is there discussion? Councilman Measy.
Yeah, I appreciate Martha's, is it on? I appreciate Martha's work on this, and as I compared it with our existing policy, obviously it's a more detailed policy. I don't think it makes any substantive changes of any real sort in what it is that we're doing. It just clarifies a lot of different things, and that's fine. It's we should follow, I guess, the model policy that the state uses. I had just one question. Julian, how many, any idea how many requests for information have we received from the public over the last bunch of years? Ballpark guess?
Not a great deal, and some of them are not framed as official requests. I mean, official Public Information Act requests where they cite the Public Information Act is a pretty small number.
Yeah.
I would say a handful. Much more numerous, pretty simple requests that tend to be things that we've already posted on our website. Where's the agenda? Could I see the minutes of this meeting? Could I see the treasurer's report of this meeting? Which are not framed as official PIA requests, but are treated the same. Certainly more of those. That's the majority of them.
Okay. And nothing to do with approving the policy, but I want to be alert to the fact that should we suddenly have a groundswell of these requests, there can be implications for staffing and things of that sort. And so I assume you will inform us if something, all of a sudden you have people lining up asking for detailed
No,
information.
certainly. I mean, generally, they're requests that we can answer, without too much difficulty or research.
Because as I think I indicated at the last meeting, there are other jurisdictions in the state where this is almost a cottage industry. There are people who come in on a regular basis asking for lots of information. City clerks, county clerks are just overwhelmed with this sometimes, and so it's been a source of discussion throughout the state. So,
Councilwoman Salt?
In partial response to that, there is a provision, if it is a big request, that we can charge the individual for the time beyond a certain amount and for legal review. So, I mean, there is a bit of bounding, and people don't like to pay, so they tend to, at least my experience, cut back the requests. So, yeah.
So there's a motion on the table. There's support for that motion to approve the policy. Would any council member like further elaboration of the policy, or are we prepared to vote? Sounds like we're prepared to vote. So all those in favor say aye. All those opposed, same sign. The motion carries unanimously. Next, we have a discussion and a vote on the draft request for proposals for parking enforcement security services. Village Manager Mansfield, turn to you on this one.
So this is a follow-up from last month's discussion when the council voted to authorize issuing a request for proposals for the security contract for parking enforcement. The council also agreed or directed us to redo the contract with Securitas, which we have done for a one-year period, and now we are preparing to issue an RFP per council direction. The language you have here is basically taken from Ron Bolt's, our attorney's, contract that was revised with Securitas, and then we added a few items that were noted as changes from the original Securitas contract in 2016. For example, the change in the hours of service, the holiday pay rate that Mr. Schaefer referred to, and a few other items that had not been reflected in the original agreement that was amended over time. So this is a draft presented to you for scope of work for the request for proposals.
So let me see if there is, for the purpose of discussion, or let's just discuss what's been recommended first by the village manager. Councilwoman Tyler?
Bullet number 3, where it goes into, number 4, where it talks about provide a marked vehicle. Considering what the situation we just went through, I think we need to be very clear on vehicles. If the company is going to allow non-marked vehicles to be used during their work hours, that needs to be stated in that contract. And that means we could be liable for anybody using a personal car or a rental car. So we need to make sure if they're not going to have a marked Securitas vehicle, then we need to have language put in there to cover us for liability purposes.
Councilwoman Salt? Yep.
Can I just respond to that quickly, just to understand you, because we are indicating in the scope of work that they are to always provide a marked vehicle.
And the present contract states that with Securitas, and in the recent situation that occurred with the person who got the ticket, correct me if I'm wrong, was that not a non-marked Securitas?
It was not a marked vehicle. It was a rental vehicle that was a temporary vehicle that did not have markings. And the previous contract, there was no specified, there was no specificity about a marked vehicle. That language wasn't included in the original contract.
And I think
It was just that they would provide a vehicle. So we are suggesting in this contract that we specify marked vehicle at all times, including replacement vehicles. They do have the ability to put a magnet and logo on the rental car
I think
if
we have
they need to use one.
The only word I would say then is that you use only. That will make it very clear. We have it here that it says marked vehicle, but only marked vehicles. I don't care if it's a slap-on or a paint or what,
Sure.
but we can't run the liability risk of a car because they had to go get a rental car or they used their personal car. We don't know. That's not our concern. The concern is that they can only use marked company cars.
Sure. Thanks.
Other comments? Councilwoman Salt?
I appreciate the work that went into this because I feel it's really very necessary. I'd like to reiterate what Cheryl said. I believe it's dangerous to have someone go approach and just say, hey, I'm giving you a ticket with no authority on the vehicle. So I think it's important that it's mandatory in the contract. Thank you.
Other comments? Go ahead, Councilwoman Tyler.
When are we trying to put this RFP out, Julie?
As soon as it's approved, we can get it out,
Okay.
anytime. And then we would give them about 2 months. We would come back in 2 months because we do need time to
go through.
Go through proposals and interview and really look at these vendors. So we would have a slightly longer period, probably 2 months.
And if I remember you saying Securitas can end whenever.
Securitas is on a 1-year deal with us now with a 60-day, same thing,
Notification.
2-month notification by either side, yes.
Okay, thank you. This is really good, and I think it clears up a lot of things and is very concise, but that only one section just to cover some more is that only. But thank you.
Village Manager, go ahead.
Yeah,
Councilman.
so when we issue the RFP, how long is that out for?
2 months, I would.
No, that's 2 months to complete. How long?
Oh, 6 weeks probably or something,
6
and
weeks.
then give us a couple of weeks to,
Okay.
somewhere in that neighborhood, 5 to 6 weeks, and then we'd give ourselves several
Okay.
weeks to review contracts
Is that-
and interview and check references and all that.
Is that typical, 5 to 6?
It's a little longer, but this one requires a little more diligence,
Okay.
especially this contract. Let me just point out, security companies don't do this particular type of work very often. This is a really specialized security contractor contract, issuing Montgomery County parking tickets and doing parking enforcement. Most security companies are not doing this particularly. You've all had some experience with security guards and what they typically do, and this is a really different kind of specialized function. So a lot of companies need to come out and look and see how we do this, and we need to scrutinize their ability to do this kind of work because it's not in their wheelhouse specifically. So it takes a little more time and diligence to come up with somebody.
Okay, and they have to be certified by the county to issue tickets?
Well, we have a long-standing agreement with the county that authorizes a contractor to write tickets here.
Right,
So
just
they just have to be certified security guards through their,
okay.
through the state, I believe, is what
Okay.
gives them. Councilman Tyler probably knows this better than I do, but I think it's the state that issues the certification to security contractors. Yeah.
Any other suggestions? I have one, and maybe I just missed it in here, that we should require that the on-duty Securitas officer is always in uniform with the company's identification clearly marked and visible regardless of the weather, if you will.
Yeah, we can add that. I think
Put 'em
that's.
on the outside of their,
Right,
not
that's right.
underneath. Yeah.
I think that's a requirement of any security guard working anywhere. by their own company's personnel rules, but we
If we
can,
put it in here,
we can
then they'll
provide, we
respond that
can
they'll do it.
specify that.
Yeah, and it can be in the contract as well. Great. So, Julian, are you looking for just the consensus of council, or you want to be authorized to issue the RFP
Consensus to
formally?
authorize is fine.
So, anybody have any objections to releasing this? If not, then let's move on to the next item on the agenda.
I don't know. I mean, you've expressed consensus. I don't think you need a formal
Yeah.
vote.
So under new business, we have discussion of the village shuttle bus and contract. I want to make a few comments about this. The village shuttle is one of the longest standing amenities provided to residents by village government. It's operated, I'm told, since 1979. It's a lifeline service for many residents of the village who count on its availability and timeliness to complete their activities of daily living. It's our cable car, if you will. It climbs the steep hill from Willard Towers to Wisconsin Avenue. It picks up and delivers from the Giant at Westbard, the Metro Transportation Center, Whole Foods, Amazon Fresh, and now front doors of all village residential buildings. The van needs room for residents who use it and the packages and luggage which accompanies them. Within the village budget, as our treasurer has told us, at over $500,000 a year, it is second only to staff salaries in this year's budget. The Red House at $3 million, less than anticipated $1 million from the developer 5500 Wisconsin, which will, and Page Park, which will likely bring us close to $1 million, were not, as he has said, included in the original 24 budget. The shuttle was one subject of conversation at October's Finance Committee meeting, and the last council and village staff struggled with equipment and timeliness of service delivered by the current vendor, finally expressing extraordinary displeasure by calling the vendor to task at a council meeting. The assistant village manager explored the availability of alternative arrangements and found them, as it turns out. Ultimately, no change in vendor was pursued. Since the spring of 2023, the Village Council has been provided with counts on the number of people riding the bus on an hourly basis throughout the day. The counts are typically in the single digits, with occasional spikes during rush hours and other periods. The village has likely experienced a change in ridership during and following the pandemic, as fewer people wanted public exposure or commute to work, respectively. All that said, the number of people riding the bus is not the only important metric to understand the shuttle's value to residents. But it does seem prudent management of the village's financial resources to better understand how the shuttle is being used and to determine what alternatives to continue the service are available. This bus is too large and expensive to maintain in its current form. It doesn't fit easily under the canopy of Willard Towers, and at Willard Towers, it's forced to kneel, back up, beep loudly every trip dawn to darkness, and make a discomforting and frankly unsafe three-point turn across Willard Avenue each cycle. The current contract with our bus company is nearing its end and does have both the termination and amendment clause, which would allow the village to consider alternative equipment. And apparently, there is competition for the village shuttle business, which presents a favorable climate for the council to consider some change. It appears that the shuttle size and services we need could be obtained for less money if we can maintain this long-standing amenity, right-size the van itself, and reallocate scarce resources. Why not consider the possibilities? The village manager and assistant village manager have begun to explore these possibilities, so I'd like to turn to them to discuss this particular issue of the village shuttle bus service and contract with us.
So we've been in touch with both the incumbent contractor, RMA, and Jason has been in touch with another vendor, an alternative vendor that also was the same vendor that provided the service to Willard Towers before it was canceled. Both of whom are able to provide a proposal, and one of whom has already provided a proposal for a smaller bus that would fit under the overhang of Willard Towers. Be about a 15-passenger bus. The current bus is 25, 26 seats. And it would have a ramp that extends for accessibility. So it'd be basically similar to the existing bus, but just smaller and fewer seats. And we have, 2 qualified vendors that are prepared to provide proposals. And as I said, one of them already has. And RMA, the incumbent, will be providing a proposal. So we thought it would be appropriate for the council to sort of disclose this publicly and then issue an RFP to go out for bid for proposals with the specifications of a smaller bus that would fit under the Willard overhang.
So, is there any discussion about this, or like the last discussion about the request for proposals, would there be a consensus from the council to issue an RFP and explore the possibilities? Of course, any recommendation would have to come back before the council. Please.
I'm probably the only council member who rides the bus once or twice a week regularly to West Bar to do my grocery shopping. I can't afford to shop in Whole Foods. I don't own a car. So when you talk about lifelines, it really is a lifeline. And because I'm on that bus so much, one of the things I notice is that people tend to take up 2 seats automatically. They get on, they might have 3, 4 bags of groceries. They might have one of those old-fashioned grocery carts, and they really do take up more than 1 seat. There's a very nice substitute bus that sometimes RMA uses. We call it the black shuttle bus, and it's, when you walk in, the seats are plush. It's all very high quality, and a lot of the residents hate it because it has a sort of a claustrophobic atmosphere. It's very difficult to navigate down that narrow aisle when you're carrying bags of groceries. It's tough for a senior citizen. So that's one concern that I have, is that if they give us too small of a bus, we have to take into consideration that 1 seat does not equal 1 passenger. Mm-hmm. It's just not the way people shop. I was on it last Wednesday, and a woman got on, and she took up the entire little storage area that's on the current bus with her groceries, which is fine. I was glad she was able to shop, but we have to be mindful of that people take up more space than you might think they do. Mm-hmm. The other concern that I have is, at one point when we were looking at the current bus that we have, is that RMA said a smaller bus breaks down more frequently because of the engine size. And that's something I think we need to consider, that this bus is in motion the entire day. And before we commit to a smaller bus, I think we need to have a very honest discussion with the company and say, are these buses prone to break down more frequently? And as far as changing companies, I think we also need to be mindful of the drivers that we have. The drivers are really the key to the success of these shuttle buses. The people adore the drivers we have. We have a new driver named Pablo. He just started, and I saw him go out of his way to help the seniors on the bus that I was on Saturday. And you don't change companies without being mindful of who your drivers are. Patrick has been with us for decades, Julian, and just one more example of driver loyalty. Last summer, the bus pulled up to the Willoughby, and the entire window was smashed out of it. And I said to the driver, "What happened?" And he said, "Someone threw a rock at the bus on River Road." He was so concerned that there were going to be residents stranded at the West Bar Giant that he He could have just dropped the bus off at the shop and quit for the night, but he didn't. He went back to the Giant, picked up the residents who were there, and came back. And that's a level of loyalty and service that you just cannot assume you're going to find from any company. Let me put it that way. So and one more thing,
Sure.
because we do have a high number of people in scooter carts, with walkers, wheelchairs, whatever bus we have to try it out with people with different mobility issues, because the last time we ordered a bus, Kathy Cooper, who was one of our council members, tried it out, and it was not good. And we rejected the bus based on Kathy's assessment of it. So it's not just that it has a ramp, it has to be a ramp that a person who uses a walker, a scooter, a wheelchair can easily navigate. So those are my thoughts.
Other comments? Councilwoman Tyler.
I can personally say the bus that was at the Willard gave the same type of service, and the residents there, as those of us who live in the building, now were very, very upset that that bus service was cut. They had just as good of drivers. They were very professional. They were very polite. In fact, we've kept up with some of the other drivers that used to drive for us, and now they come back because they have other businesses that they're in, and they come back to the Willard to help people. I think the bigger, we tend to go back into the personal, but if we can save a substantial amount of money, I think it would behoove us to look into it and not just cut it off and shut the door and just say, no, we'll keep the same big old bus. That, times have changed. Equipment has changed. It's improved. And I think shame on us if we don't at least look at it, talk to the people, and get an understanding for each of us so that we're comfortable with it. I think it's unfair just to say, no, we'll just stay with this company just because. We've had problems with this company in their billing issues. And I think it's only fair that we look at other companies just like we're looking at other companies for other contracts that we have. So we can either say yes or we can say no. The ridership numbers I watched diligently, and it's in my comments back to you all. I look at it and I mark it. And this past December, was an anomaly compared to all the other months. And I think it was because of the holiday season. You had a lot of people coming in, visiting, and a lot of people used the metro to catch the bus and forth. But we're back to the numbers that we normally have, which are, as you said in the beginning, are single digits. And so we don't want to talk about it, but there are cost factors when we have a bus that I see regularly every morning between the hours of 8 and maybe 11 that have maybe 1 or 2 people riding. That's something we have to think about just as much as we want to get into the personal of the drivers. It's the company and the service and the equipment that they provide us.
Other comments? I see Councilman Measy and then Councilwoman Salt.
The current contractor certainly would be free to respond to the RFP, right?
Yes. Yeah, and I should also mention, or maybe we should have mentioned it in the preamble, that the current contract expires in June of 2025 with a 6-month notice for termination. So,
and as I recall, when we did this last time, buses were brought up here, and we inspected the buses and tried to see whether we could get in and what they looked like, so we don't have to decide this in a vacuum. Is the current contractor, Julian, will only provide this type of bus, or if we purchased a smaller bus, are they able to? Would that be a possibility for them to?
Yes. Yeah, they've indicated they can provide a smaller bus comparable to the other vendor who's already given us a proposal.
So will the RFP then invite people to respond in terms of different options in terms of bus sizes and so on, and also to make clear the issues that Melanie has talked about in terms of accessibility, especially for people in wheelchairs, people who are seniors and so on, mobility challenged people.
Well, the RFP will be whatever we want to specify, so if the council would like to see options of different size buses, or, I mean, what we were considering was about a 15 passenger bus as a, you know, as a bus that would be small enough to fit in the spaces we need it to and still would provide, you know, adequate seating. But if the council wants to extend the RFP to cover 3 or 4 different size buses, we could word it that way. But
Well, I guess
that's
either 15 or 27. Is that?
Yeah, there might be some options for in the low 20s, for
Yeah.
example, but they may not be much smaller than the current bus.
I mean, it seems to me that the crucial thing is we want something smaller than what we currently have. We want something that will fit under all the canopies, and we want things that are accessible to people with mobility problems and mobility challenges. That's the basic things that I'm interested in here, and whether that's, 18 people or 15 people or 20 people is not a big deal as far as I'm concerned.
Councilwoman Sol.
Teeing off what some of your comments were, Bobby, I think we need to recognize that one of the assets of Friendship Heights is we are a barrier-free community. So there are relatively more mobility impaired residents here than other places. And I think, the shuttle is a lifeline, without which we have some very isolated people that is something we can avoid, and it's our duty to provide, I think. I don't ride the shuttle regularly, but when I hurt my foot and I had that stupid boot on where I couldn't walk, I was using it all the time. So there are people who have temporary needs to use it, and then maybe they don't need it for a while. But we whether we acknowledge it or not, we will all have some difficulty physically sometime in our life, and this is very helpful to people. But I'm all for saving money. I'm all for looking into this. I'm all for looking at new ways to meet the need, not to cut and eliminate the program. So I just want to be clear that I'm not for eliminating.
Other comments? Councilwoman Tyler?
I will say right now, the majority of the residents at the Willard still have to walk to go down to meet the bus. And there are a lot of people in that building that have a mobility issue. And so that's a large piece of property that has a lot of people that they have to walk to get a distance to get to that. So that's why I say the other bus that the Willard did have, it did help, and it could fit underneath the overhang. It had the ramp for the wheelchair. It accommodated to help people with mobility issues. And now, after they took the bus away, people have to walk a lot farther to get to it. And it's not easy for those who are in wheelchairs and the walkers and everything else.
Yes, Councilman Macy.
Can we just proceed as we did with the other RFP? Ask Julian and Jason to draft an RFP, taking into consideration the various comments from the council, and then have us look at it and decide what we want to do. It looks like we're not under huge time pressures here.
Councilman
Quick
Shaker.
question. Would the smaller bus fit in our garage here? The 15-seat bus?
Our garage in this building?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
No.
So, is there anyone who objects to Councilman Measy's proposal? Bring something back to the February council meeting, which addresses the concerns that were and suggestions that were made during the discussion. Seeing none, Village Manager, I think you have direction. Great. That takes us to the discussion on the security camera policy And who am I turning to on this? Councilwoman Salt.
Yes, there's a proposed policy in the packet, and it was posted on the website. The Communications Committee approved the policy for advancement to the council. And in summary, if we have security cameras, we are required to have a policy about them. This is in the vein of, open and transparent government. The policy addresses the purpose of the cameras, which are safety and security, and to aid police, fire, and rescue. The notices that there's no real-time monitoring, that it's restricted to public areas, and notification on the location of cameras, and there's a process for reviewing recordings. So the Communications Committee approved this policy, and I move that it be approved by the council.
Is there support for that motion? Mayor White, was that are you? Okay, so there is a motion and support from Mayor White. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor of adopting the Public Information Act policy say aye. All those opposed, same sign. The motion carries. I'm sorry, that was the security camera policy. The motion was for that, and the motion on the security camera policy passes. The last item on the agenda is the data use agreement for the quality of life statistical reports with researchers from the GWU Trachtenberg School of Public Policy and Public Administration. Just by way of background, the data use agreement is standard operating procedure for researchers making use of data, in this case data from our quality of life survey. This data use agreement sets out the deliverables, conditions, security, and protections assured by the researchers in return for access to the data. Tonight I'm asking council, and I so move for the purpose of discussion, to approve the agreement and authorize the village manager to sign it pending the review by the village attorney and to make any adjustments recommended as necessary. And I want to see whether, I know the village manager may have had a conversation or heard from the village attorney. Anything, village manager?
Not as of right now. He's still
Okay.
reviewing. Yeah.
So in order to have this approved, should any adjustments be necessary, they can be communicated to the researchers. They've both signed off and given their approval to the current draft. I think that if there are any recommendations made, they'll be happy to consider those, and I would suggest that we authorize the village manager to proceed.
Just one
Yes,
question.
Councilman Mazie.
I just wanted to be on the record that this, I know it's in the contract, but that this analysis is being done at no cost to the village.
That's correct. There is no cost to the village.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, Councilwoman Tyler?
So are we waiting for a comment back from the attorney?
What I'm suggesting, and what we could take a vote on this if that would be useful. My motion is to authorize the village manager to sign the contract pending the review of the village attorney, and then to as well authorize the village attorney to take whatever steps, if there are recommendations made, to make those adjustments. Okay. Is there support for that motion? Councilwoman Salt, thank you very much. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, same sign. The motion carries. With that, let me see if there are any other questions from council members about anything else. So I see Councilman Mazie and
I know
Councilman Schaefer.
some of us are in a hurry to start the tape on the football game, but so I am. But yeah, are we setting a schedule now for what's the procedure in terms of the interviews that we're doing? We have a Saturday date and a Tuesday evening.
Right. So we know what dates we will be meeting, and we'll get confirmation about the number of candidates that we will be interviewing. My guess is that we have more candidates than we will want to interview on one session, and so we'll take both scheduled sessions to interview.
And the procedure will be that Julian's now going to contact them and tell them the available dates.
Yes.
And have them come. So your assumption is that we'll do 3 on Saturday and 3 on Tuesday.
Assuming there are just 6. Yep. Julian, do you want to speak to the
There
schedule?
are just 6.
Say?
There are just 6,
Okay.
and so we can schedule 3 on one day and 3 on the other day.
Yep.
If
And-
that's,
Sorry.
and then there's a third council meeting that's scheduled
Mhm.
As I recall.
as a follow-up.
As I recall, at our meeting about this, you indicated that rather than spend the time at each session outlining the procedure, that you'd prepare, or Julian would prepare, the two of you together would prepare a document that we could send to each candidate, telling them how we're going to proceed and so on and so forth, so you won't have to repeat all that at each interview.
At the pleasure of the council, I'm happy to work with the village manager on that. I think that's an efficient way to go about doing the process, not to
Okay.
use what limited time we have. So, Julian, I'll speak with you about that tomorrow. Yeah. Councilman
Well,
Schaefer?
I don't know if any of them are watching, but I just wanted to thank all the people who applied for stepping up and offering to take the position.
Any further discussion with that? Is there a motion to adjourn? Is there support? All those in favor? Aye. The motion carries. It is 9:40. We are adjourned. And you're right, at least one of us does want to start the tape for the game. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.